A journey on a luxurious train, a complex murder, 13 suspects, and the world's greatest detective. All of this can only mean one thing. We're comparing Murder on the Orient Express on this episode of Retro vs. Remake.
I'm Reggie Parker.
And I'm Dan Bulick. Welcome to another episode of Retro vs. Remake. This is the series where we compare films and their remakes. Join us as we answer the question, should this remake exist? Today's films are Murder on the Orient Express. We'll start with the original, which was made in 1974, starring Albert Finney, Lauren Bacall, Martin Balsam, Ingrid Bergman, Jacqueline Bisset, Jean-Pierre Cassel, Sean Connery, Sean Gilgood, Wendy Hiller, Anthony Perkins, Vanessa Redgrave, Rachel Roberts, Richard Widmark, Michael York, Colin Blakely, George Coulouris, and Dennis Quilley. Directed by Sidney Lumet, screenplay by Ball Den, and music by Richard Rodney Bennett. Okay, Murder on the Orient Express 2017, starring Kenneth Branagh, Penelope Cruz, Judi Dench, Willem Dafoe, Johnny Depp, Josh Gad, Derek Jacobi, Leslie Odom Jr., Michelle Pfeiffer, Daisy Ridley, Tom Bateman, Marwan Kenzari, Olivia Colman, Lucy Boynton, Manuel Garcia Rilfo, and Sergei Polunin. Directed by Kenneth Branagh, screenplay by Michael Green, and music by Patrick Doyle. And both of these movies are, of course, based on the 1934 novel by Agatha Christie. There have been also many TV adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express. I just wanted to bring up that there is a whole series on Poirot and his adventures, and he's starring David Schuett, who we know from the In-Laws remake as our villain in that movie. So he's Poirot elsewhere, so I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's pretty cool.
All right, so that's the gist of both films. Huge casts. We'll get into that. But Reggie, what is your first experience with either film?
First experience with either film is for this podcast. Typically, when it comes to movies like this, where I know that there's a book series, I actually try to read the book before I actually watch the film, just because, in general, the books tend to be better than movies, and I don't want to ruin a good book for myself. So, great suggestion, by the way, on your part, because I did get a chance to read the full novel before getting into this, and I was able to kind of compare and contrast the two films.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said before, I had been reading a few Agatha Christie books lately on the suggestion of my wife, and I got to Murder on the Orient Express, and I kind of like to do that thing where after I read the book, I'm going to reward myself by watching the movie. So I did watch the remake after I read the novel recently, but I had not watched the original until doing it for this series. Well, they are very similar films. Oddly enough, though, the names are different, so my synopsis is going to kind of just glaze over some of that stuff. But here we go. Hercule Poirot is the world's greatest detective. He must return to London by train. On a ferry to the train station, he runs into Mary Debenham and Arbuthnot, who speak of something being over soon. At the train station, Poirot runs into his friend, the director of the train, and he gets Poirot a cabin even though the train is oddly full. There is a large assortment of passengers. Mrs. Hubbard, Mary Debenham, Arbuthnot, Princess Dragomirov, her maid Hildegard Schmidt, Ratchet, his secretary Hector McQueen, and his older valet, Countess Indrenyi and her husband Count Indrenyi, Hardman, conductor Pierre Michael, a car tycoon, and a missionary. The train gets stopped by a snowbank and must stop temporarily. During this craziness, it is discovered that Ratchet is killed. With pleading from his friend, Poirot takes the case to solve who did it. He uncovers Ratchet is really gangster Cassetti. He was responsible for the kidnapping and murder of a Daisy Armstrong, the infant child of a wealthy family. The result of this crime led to the mother, Sonia Armstrong, to give birth prematurely and ultimately die. Her husband, Colonel Armstrong, then committed suicide, and the maid who was falsely accused of the crime killed herself too. Poirot finds various clues like a button, pipe cleaner, handkerchief, burned letter, kimono, and uniform. He also interviews the passengers one by one. The more he interviews people, the more he realizes that people were lying about their identity, and everyone has a connection with this Armstrong incident. Ultimately, he comes with two solutions. Either an outside man came and did it and then fled, or every one of the passengers committed the crime. Solution 2 is what really happened, but rather than punishing these people for their vengeance, he ultimately decides to tell authorities it was an outside man. The end. So like we said, very similar. Some of the names are different. I didn't go into every character because then the synopsis would take forever. We'll get into the characters when we compare the characters. But I think we should start with one character, and of course that is our main character, Hercule Poirot. And in the original film, he's portrayed by Albert Finney.
The world's most celebrated crime fighter.
I take a professional interest in crime.
Agatha Christie's brilliant Belgian detective. Albert Finney is Detective Hercule Poirot.
And in the remake, he's portrayed by Kenneth Branagh.
My name is Hercule Poirot, and I am probably the greatest detective in the world.
Just starting this off, I think the original film, to me, feels like it picks up more where the book does, in terms of we really don't know much about Poirot. We know he's like a famous detective, but we're not really privy to any of his previous experiences. And we just pick up with him more or less getting on a ferry to get on the train. That's not as interesting to describe. So let's talk about the remake. The remake gives us, what would you say, like side quests?
Yeah, like he's finishing up another case. Well, first, before he finishes up the case, we get introduced to his weird quirkiness, where he's like obsessed over finding eggs that are exactly the same. Where like people all over this village or area are just trying to get him two perfect eggs, and it's like this big deal. So it's weird. The eggs come into play a little bit later, but he's just a very particular man. So we're introduced to this bizarre quality trait, and then it turns out we're in Jerusalem at the Wailing Wall. And then a rabbi, a priest, and an imam. As the joke goes, they're all accused of stealing this relic. And we're introduced to Poirot doing what he does, making deductions, finding the small clues, and solving the case. And we get a little action here as well.
That's a key difference between our Poirots in these films. One, that we do get to see him in action quite a bit more in this remake. And in general, and we'll talk about it as we go through, the remake has more action, which can be appreciated. Cannot, we'll see where we land.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point that you point out the egg thing, because they start with the eggs being different sizes, and they follow up with him stepping in shit.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
it is not it is the unbalance. So he does it again.
Right. So what I can appreciate about that is they're giving us some sort of background as to why Poirot is kind of a cut above your average investigator, detective, whatever you want to call it. He notices the small things. He knows the small things, and when things are out of place, it really bothers him. It's kind of like a gift and a curse for him. But like we notice that it helps him with the priest, the imam, and the rabbi, which is none of those guys have like hard shoes. Wait a minute, this wall where the thing was stolen, someone must have done it with a boot, the inspector, and we get to see the process, and we get to see him be pretty clever. Like he sends a guard to the south wall, he puts his cane in the wall, seemingly for no reason, and it all kind of ties back in when the foolish inspector hires the best detective in the world to cover up his own crime. Genius. I do appreciate this world building that's happening and building out this character. Again, I have no frame of reference for any other of Agatha Christie's works, and if he gets expanded out like that. But from what I know from just Murder on the Callous Coach or Murder on the Orient Express, they don't go that deep into it. So I think that this was a choice, and that happens quite a bit throughout this remake. This was a choice to sort of give us background, give us action, and overall, I would say I found it pretty interesting. I didn't think it was time to really be a purist about what's in the book, because I can treat this as its own separate story before we get into the the main line.
Yeah, I didn't mind getting a little more action in the beginning of the film. I mean, we're going to be on a train for the pretty good portion of the movie. Not much action you can really do on a really tight train. So, rope people in with a little bit of action. It's not the most exciting sequence, but, like you said, it really just shows, like, Poirot's thought process. Like, he was able to know to put a guard there. Let's put this cane in here. it's all going to come into play, and then you're going to see I'm a genius. So we get
Right.
a little action, we get a little insight to Poirot's thinking, and like you mentioned, he was talking to a guard, just going about like I see the world as it should be, and when it's not, then I could start to solve these clues. So we get a little more insight with him there too. So it's a pretty solid introduction, I'd say, in the remake.
Whereas in the original, we get more of a kind of like oddball,
Yeah,
you know, like this
he's
guy. He's very unassuming at first, right?
hmm yeah, he's a strange character, and you definitely don't get the world's greatest detective vibe from him right away. You don't get it from him almost like a lot of the movie, I would say. You do get that kind of like I don't know, not necessarily snobbery, but he's very particular as well. But it doesn't come across as, I guess, charming as he does in the remake, because he'll say something and he has like this very serious face on the whole time, as opposed to the remake Poirot, where he's definitely like has a, like kind of a smirk or just a levity to him. Poirot in the original, it's pretty serious most of the movie.
Yeah, Albert Finney plays it pretty straight. Like, he has embodied the character. This is true, but without us getting a lot of background into him, all we get, like you mentioned, are these sort of odd moments. Like he's on the ferry, he's kind of seasick. There's nothing spectacular about him, at least not that we know of, until, like you mentioned, a little bit later in the film. But we get a bit of his eccentricities. His kind of eccentric outfits. He likes to eat desserts and think. Uh, these are the types of things they chose to highlight versus his extreme sort of intellect. And I think that it does help in the sense that he can be sort of underestimated throughout the film, and I think that allows him to sort of operate in a way maybe the other Poirot portrayal can't. But I mean, ultimately, it all ends up kind of being the same thing either way. It comes down to your style preference. I would say yes, it's truer to the book, but it's a movie, so style points are important.
I'd say we also spend a little bit more time with Poirot in the remake. There's definitely a lot more quiet moments that we just get him kind of by himself. We find out about Catherine in the remake. Which definitely doesn't happen in the book. It's just his lost love, I guess you could call her. He's just
Sure.
with her picture a couple of times, like even like asking her for help. Like I don't know how to solve this case. So you get to see a vulnerable Poirot, which you
Mhm.
definitely don't see in the original film. You don't really know anything about his life outside of the events that's really happening in the original film.
Yeah, you get that range. That's the word I'm looking for here. I think we get that range.
Hmm.
You get to see Poirot in action in a remake. You get to see him vulnerable, like you mentioned. He's got a
Yeah.
backstory. He carries a gun around sometimes, and he's willing to use it potentially. So there's just so much more Kenneth gets to do with his
Yeah.
portrayal that Albert Finney really doesn't. And honestly, a lot of times when he's not actively solving the case, even he's getting played to like comedic effect. Like he gets up multiple times throughout the night, like he's trying to go back to sleep, and he's got to turn the light back on and figure out who's out in the hallway. And again, it's more authentic and to the point of the book in some ways, but at the same time, sometimes that is not that interesting to see. And I think that that's where Finney's portrayal kind of falls off. Like you mentioned, we don't know much about him other than that he can solve the case. In a remake, we get to see a lot of shades of Poirot.
Yeah. I don't even know if we see him like laugh or anything in the original film. He's very serious. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. He doesn't really get too many, I guess, comedic moments that I really recognize. There's one cool moment Albert Finney gets in the original where he's moving the dogs of the princess, and then he hands them off to somebody, and then as he hands them off, he just slightly pets them. I just thought that was a little quirky thing. Like, oh, you
Yeah.
can't just hand them the dogs; I have to pet them too. So you get to like little things here and there, but I think, like I said, because he's Kenneth Branagh is just more portrayed more in that remake, so they just do more with Poirot,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like you said, that range we just get a lot more emotions and just random things. Like he's reading Dickens to himself and just laughing like a silly schoolboy. Oh, that Dickens, just little things like that sprinkled here and there in the remake, and I just find him like overall just the more charming of the
yeah.
two, a little warmer Like when Poirot would like insult somebody in the original, it's just like, damn, that's just a fucking insult, man. But like, he does it like more with jest in the remake. So he's not really just digging into you. He's just being like playful, like he does with his friend Monsieur Book. He's like, "You are not going to go very far in life, my friend." Shit like that.
Yeah.
So he's more playful, and like you said, a whole range of emotions and things from Poirot in the remake.
It's more endearing. In the original, I guess, like you said, there's not even that many funny things that happen. I guess when he starts kind of eating the dessert, that's sort of funny, but nothing too over the top, really, in my opinion. So, yeah, and even the moments where the original movie has like kind of set pieces, like Poirot's kind of funny night sort of setup with the mustache thing, they go even bigger in the remake.
Yeah, because it's just like a hairnet in the original, but in like the remake, it's like this custom-made mustache-fitting, I don't know, garment, we'll call it. So yeah, it's pretty absurd. We didn't even compare the mustaches. I think we have to compare the mustaches here. It's a very defining trait. And Albert Finney's got a pretty good money bags mustache going on there with nice and curly in the end. It's not huge. I don't want to keep comparing it to the book, but in the book it's described as this huge mustache. It's one of his defining features, and they definitely defined it in the remake because it's sort of more like the book because it's sort of like a double mustache. I don't even know what the fuck that is.
I don't know.
But he pulls it off in the remake because it's like long on one, like in the front, like under his nose, and then it's like to the sides, and then underneath that there's like more of his facial hair. So it's pretty character defining. Like, okay, that guy. Look at that guy. Look at that guy's mustache. Can't miss it. Only one guy has it. It's pretty impressive in the remake.
And there it is, and that comes full circle. It's definition. He's a defined character. Like you said, we get his joking nature, and his jokes actually come back into play in action too. So whether it's putting the cane in the wall, that ends up being funny because why was that there? Well, now we know why that was there. When he meets Monsieur Balk for the first time. And it's like, this is a prostitute. It's
like, yes, he's very polite to her. He doesn't like, oh, you're just a prostitute. He's like, it was a pleasure to meet you, madame. Or,
Yeah, because like even when he just calls her a prostitute, she's like, yeah. It's fun. It's fun. So I think we're obviously both leaning towards the remake. Kenneth Branagh, his Poirot, just more defined, more charming, more action. He helps carry quite a bit more of the film versus the original. Where Albert Finney, I think he does his job, and I think we really get to see him in action at the end of the film.
Yeah,
which is cool. But he gets a lot more assistance throughout the film from other actors.
Yeah, I think we'll go into that as we compare the other characters, just because he does get a lot more screen time in the remake. It is going to take away from some of our other characters in the remake.
Yeah. I guess bonus points for directing the movie, too.
Yeah. Good on him. All right. So our next character, we're going to stay away from the suspects for a bit. Let's do Ratchet, a.k.a. Cassetti. In the original, he is portrayed by Richard Widmark.
And I...
Richard Widmark.
show you this.
And in the remake, he's portrayed by Johnny Depp.
You're the world-famous detective, Hercule Poirot, avenger of the innocent. Is that what they call you in the papers?
And you are innocent?
A small role in both films. Our villain, who gets murdered, but gets slightly different portrayals.
Like you mentioned, they both have a small role. I'll say this because I think what jumps out to me, just like you said, Poirot looks like what you'd expect more in the remake. I'm going to say the same thing about the remake Cassetti, like the kind of beady eyes, rough face. Like they even give Johnny Depp a few scars and things like that that we get to see. Johnny Depp, to me, just from first looking at him, I was like, oh, yep, that's the bad guy. There's Cassetti right there. And Widmark, through his acting, I see kind of the tough sort of bad guy portrayal, but I think he has to actually kind of start talking. I think the way they frame Johnny Depp in the movie, his outfit, his manner of dress, it looks different than everyone else. You can tell he has like these American origins and stuff like that. He looks like an Italian gangster, and he's played that role before. Looking at something like Public Enemies, or something like that. So Johnny Depp knows how to play a mobster, and he plays this one really well, which is subtle, which is
Mhm.
he was a mobster that's trying to kind of play it down, but that little bit of darkness is still in him.
Yeah, it keeps
Where
creeping up. Yeah, he can't fully like get rid of it. He can't fully mask the fact that he used to be a gangster. It's pretty obvious to you, the viewer, and it's definitely obvious to Poirot.
Whereas Widmark, I think they're both mean, but I think Widmark gets to just kind of be more of a dick to the people that work for him. We get to
Yeah,
see that in action quite a bit more.
yeah. I was gonna say Johnny Depp. I guess just by his facial expressions, he just looks like a bad guy. He's kind of a dick to the guys that work for him, but he's definitely more of a dick in the original film, where he's just like kind of unleashing on
Yeah,
his valet. He's just like, "Well, come on, just, I'm not gonna eat it now. Just put it over there." It's like, Jesus, man, it's like, calm down a little bit. So he is a little more. I'd say Richard Widmark's performance. Like, I don't get gangster vibes at all from him. It wasn't until he's like sort of a dick in his private quarters to his employees that I was like, okay, I'm seeing more of that villain. But he's very unassuming. I wouldn't peg him for a gangster at all just by looking at him. But yeah, to your point, Johnny Depp definitely like has that without going over the top with it for sure. He definitely subdued, and there's
yeah,
almost a charm to him. When he's alone with Mrs. Hubbard, he's just like he's like, hey, what are you doing on this train? A little bit, and then she just shoots him down right away. Yeah, interesting performances.
definitely. And for Depp going with that, he's a little out of his depth in his new profession.
Hmm.
They both are, but like it's more apparent, and you can kind of see it where it's like, all right, like yes, he's able to pull off, maybe being more of a gentleman on paper, but then he doesn't know anything about antiques, which neither of them do. But like, I don't know, he's selling it. I think that's really what it comes down to. Johnny Depp is selling it in the look. He's selling it. I think it was very smart for them to choose the facial features with the light scarring. I thought it was very smart the accent that he affected.
Hmm.
It felt more like a guy that had like sort of Italian mob, background now on this train. Whereas like for Widmark, it just felt like kind of gruff American, and I
Hmm.
think it wasn't quite what I pictured in the book, and I think Johnny was closer to what I imagined.
Yeah, and he also in the remake. I don't think this is done in the original. Like he's still like running into like like mafia kind of like he like sold some art to some Italians that wasn't exactly legitimate, and then he's like still doing that shit. It's like even though he's an art dealer now, he's so terrible at being an art dealer. He
Yeah,
just goes right back into his mobster ways, even if he's just dealing art. So yeah, it's a
yeah,
really fun portrayal, I think, Johnny Depp.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that though, because I will say this: the deviation of him kind of defining his enemy was different from the book. Like you mentioned, like he's specifically worried about like a mobster that he sold bad art or
Hmm.
antiques to. I understand the choice. I think the choice was to show a plausible reason why he would try to hire Perot,
Hmm.
um, versus like the original where it's just like I just want to because I'm nervous about these letters.
Hmm.
Because that's also sort of backtracked by the fact that he's not that worried about the letters if you really like read into it because they're fake. I think Johnny again is selling it more, and even though there is this deviation here by defining a plausible enemy and maybe taking us the viewer off the scent a little bit with that, I would prefer those small deviations with what we get out of the character versus kind of sticking to the script but not really being wowed by Widmark's portrayal. It was fine, but it wasn't. It didn't read as to what I thought the character was supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be because I'm more familiar with Johnny Depp, but it's more memorable what Johnny Depp did. Widmark, I can't even like. I'm trying to just even think of his face
Uh,
right now, and I'm just kind of drawing a blank. I know he's an old guy, gray hair, but
he,
he doesn't really have. I guess he doesn't really just have as much to do
no,
as Johnny Depp does.
he would have been great just the way he looked. He was great as like a old general or something like that, or an old detective. But like I don't get mobster. I just
Yeah.
don't. And Johnny Depp, I get immediately. Yep, that guy's in the mob. Got it. And like I said, Widmark he was fine, but when we're making character comparisons in something that whenever you have some tied to the source material, you're looking for those little subtle nods towards the book and someone's trying to portray that. And so far, we're 2 for 2 in the remake in terms of the lead and the villain. So I'm leaning towards Johnny Depp too.
Yeah, same. I really don't have much to add to that though, because it is a very brief time. I mean, it's a very small character. Like, I mean, yeah, he sets things in motion, but he really doesn't have a lot of screen time because he does die pretty early, and they don't do a lot of flashbacks. So there's not really much to compare. But I guess with what little screen time each actor did have, Johnny Depp just was able to do more. All right, should we get to one more character before we get to all our suspects?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we're going to compare the director of The Trains. He has a different name in the original. It's Bianchi, as opposed to Buch, or Boch, which is what he was called in the book. So we have Martin Balsam portraying Bianchi in the original.
Monsieur Poirot is a detective. He did it.
Tom Bateman portraying Buch in the remake.
We're surrounded by lies.
So this is the director of The Train, friends with Poirot. Very different portrayals.
Yeah.
And I think we need to start again where we started with Poirot, just their introduction to both of these characters.
We'll start with the original. The original is kind of more in line with what you would sort of expect from the film, which is, Poirot sitting down to dinner, and then, oh, it's my old friend Poirot. And, that's pretty much it, and he's making sure that things are to his liking because ultimately he's running the train. He's an influential guy. He wants to show his friend a good time, and the way that he does it is by kind of like pushing his weight around as the train director. He's saying, hey, what's up with this meal? Like, let's go. And I appreciate the portrayal. It feels, again, having read the book source material, to me, he felt more like what I was expecting from Book, even though for some reason his name isn't Book.
Yeah, change I don't understand, but that's what we have in the original Bianchi. Yeah, a very different portrayal than I expected, just because he is different in the book. First off, he's much closer to Poirot in age, and Book in the remake is much younger. So I'll just get into his introduction. So it's not while Poirot is dining. Poirot is like in the kitchen, just like observing, like appreciating fine bakery. He's like, with so much destructive and terrible things in the world, this is what life is about. Just again showing off his weird quirkiness and things he appreciates. And then we're introduced to a man with a prostitute, a young man with a prostitute, just looking for a place to go for 20 minutes. And immediately Poirot is like, oh, my friend, Monsieur Book. They meet each other again, and Poirot is able to deduce that the woman he's with is a prostitute. It's a very funny, charming scene.
Yeah.
And you do see the respect that Book has for Poirot, because like he's with this prostitute, right? And he's I'm assuming he's paid for her business and he wants to get stuff done. But like as soon as he finds out that Poirot needs to get on train, he's like, all right, hold on a second. Sorry, we're gonna go. I'm gonna go take care of my friend now. So very different. Yeah, I did not expect him to be like that at all in the remake.
And although that scene isn't what we're expecting either, it does, once again, that scene reinforces Poirot, because the prostitute's like, holy shit, you're friends with Poirot. So, I mean, like, the international renown is more apparent to me in the remake. And again, with him being an internationally renowned detective, I appreciate that being reinforced. This is the one time where I'm thinking I like the actor and I like what he's doing, but I don't get how it doesn't feel right. The original actor feels like what I'm expecting. Someone closer to his age, someone, and we see it throughout the film, that jumps to conclusions.
Yes.
Monsieur Martin Balsam.
She did it. He did it. He did it.
And that's more in line with, again, I'm fresh off a read, more in line with what I was expecting. The guy was like, it's the Italian guy. Fucking lady did it. Maybe it was that dude. And like, yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting versus, Bianchi's reaction as Book.
Right.
Versus the actual Book, who, like, I don't know, like, there's some of that, but I felt he was kind of more along for the ride. He kind of falls off, in my opinion, from that initial interaction, and then after that, he kind of turns into exposition.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. Book in the remake, his introduction, so great introduction, a very memorable introduction, but after that, yeah, he doesn't really have much to do. He's just he's just kind of there. He does have a little conversation with Poirot here and there, just to help us just hear what Poirot is thinking and where he's coming with the case.
Mhm.
But nothing comes close to his introduction, which is why I think like his character just kind of like falls off for you.
Sure.
But like going to what Bianchi did, he's more true to the book. But is he a better character? Because he has those funny moments where he's like agreeing with, oh yeah, it's definitely them. Oh no, it's definitely her. No, it's definitely him. Some funny beats which happened in the book, but he doesn't do it all the time. And then
Right.
even like Dr. Constantine starts doing it instead of him. So it's like, wait, that's not your shtick. That's
Right.
that's the other guy's shtick. Don't steal his only thing. I thought it was more true to the book, but I still think that introduction was just so much more memorable.
Sure.
It just seems like a much more fun character because I can't really remember much of what Bianchi does other than those funny beats.
Right.
And maybe
Right.
he gets to decide at the end like who's going to get convicted here, which does happen in the book, but we'll get
Sure.
into that when we talk about the endings.
Yeah, it's again, and I think that this theme is going to permeate throughout this episode. It's a choice because where I think Book kind of recedes into the background in the remake, it's because, and we'll get into this, there's supposed to be kind of like another character there as well,
Mhm.
and there in the book there's a little more dialogue between the three characters,
Right.
whereas Book, again being sort of younger, I didn't take him as, I mean, in no way in either film, but like, is this true? But I really didn't take him as Poirot's equal. Like they're friends, but Poirot's doing all the thinking mostly, and Book is just kind of like, who knows? And without that sort of back and forth dialogue, he does fade into the background. But to your point, yeah, we're getting more Bianchi. I hate saying it. We're getting more of him, but he's not doing anything.
Yeah.
He's not even like thinking. Like I felt in the book, even though he was wrong about things, he seemed to be thinking better.
Yeah.
Like really trying to come to a conclusion. And when he realized that, he had his preconceived sort of ideas of who it would be, but he was open to actively thinking about the case. Whereas this guy just seems to be like, aha, it's the next person we talk to.
Yeah.
So because one, they change his name and they kind of get away from some of the character portrayal. I'm with you. I'm still leaning towards this remake because look, entertainment is the name of the day today.
Yeah.
And Bateman's Book is just he's entertaining, and his name is Book.
Yeah. And he also has like another scene when he's giving drinks to everybody, compliments of the Orient Express, and he's giving one to the missionary. And then she's like, "But does it not agree with you?" And when she says no, and she's like, "No, I do not believe in the ways of sin and whatever." And he's like, "Okay, and we will never talk again." The rest of the drink, he's got some good funny moments that aren't
Absolutely.
just like so reactionary as Bianchi is in the original. So like we use this word a lot. He seems to have a little more agency. So he's a
Yes.
more memorable character. Seems like a more fun character. And even though he does kind of get lost in the fold towards the later half of the movie, I still think a more memorable of the two.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it too, he does have more, in my opinion, he kind of has more stakes. It feels like he really doesn't want this kind of like bad news to get out. He does help us move along. Like when the snowbank happens, he's like,
Yeah.
we're not there yet.
We're
They're
not
gonna
going to
come-
do anything.
They're gonna come find us. So he's a cool character, and it actually does complement Poirot in a lot of ways. Not that I was expecting from this character, but yeah, he doesn't care. He's like,
Yeah.
you got it. We'll figure it out. This guy's smart. Yeah, you see my friend Poirot. I like the portrayal. I think that the movie is making choices that aren't in line with the book, but they're making choices that help this movie go along. And I think they're smart choices, as I think we're going to get into, that help with the flow of things.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Definitely.
3-0 remakes so far. But look, there's 12 other characters, so
There are. I feel like we're gonna do a 1-to-1 sort of, but not every character gets the same treatment. I kind of put them in an
What if-
order of sort of importance, kind of.
I think that's fair. And honestly, where we can, because there are opportunities, let's try to take two and put them in the same
Yeah,
conversation,
for sure.
like the Count and Countess.
Yeah. Definitely. I think the first character we should definitely compare is Arbuthnot, just because in the remake he's taking the place of two characters, as opposed, like you said before, there's no Dr. Constantine in the remake. He's only in the original, and he is a character from the book. So we
Right.
can get there. So let's kind of lump all three of them together. So
Sure.
Arbuthnot, Colonel Arbuthnot, is portrayed by Sean Connery in the original, and
Sean Connery. How did you know?
then Dr. Arbuthnot is portrayed by Leslie Odom Jr. in the remake.
You leave her out of this.
And then we have Dr. Constantine, portrayed by George Cloris in the original.
The murderer is with us now.
Leslie Odom Jr. is going to take the role of both of these characters.
Sure.
Did you want to just start there and just like, what did you think of them getting rid of the doctor?
I think yeah, let's start there because that immediately jumped out to me having, read the book. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know how I feel about taking a character out, making sort of like racial implication that wasn't there before, with Arbor being black in this case.
Mhm.
I think like historically and just based off the age, because Leslie Odom to me also looks young, which I think is because we're creating a love interest, and I think for the general audience they want it to be like a love interest you actually give a shit about. so so I think that's why he skews younger. It's a bit of a distraction for me. I think giving him so much heavy lifting for a pretty inconsequential character is a interesting choice. I think that they did it to remove the Dr. Constantine element, which just let's knock this character out right now in the original. George Caloris, yeah, great. Thanks for being there. Goofy hair. He's a doctor. The guy definitely died then, and that's pretty much his only contribution. So I respect the fact that they wanted to consolidate the character
Mhm.
to streamline this remake. I don't necessarily think it was the right character to combine that with. It works, but then it doesn't. And I'll say this as well. I think that making Leslie Odom sort of like his blackness and being in an interracial relationship sort of starts to pick up on some of the themes that are in the book, which are it's the 1930s in anywhere in the world. So in the original, you have more, I guess, racism, nationalism against Italians. There's a lot of talk about Indian people. Like there's a delineation between sort of the races and the nationalities that were more apparent at that time. That's just the way people thought, and I think they tried to like show that with this character, but it didn't ring true to me because that really wasn't part of the book, so I wasn't really sure why even go through the steps of doing that. Because once again, Arbonot ultimately is a side character, so to have him doing so much got a little muddy for me. I don't know about you.
I guess I'll start with just combining him with the Doctor. I was definitely fine with that. Just putting those two characters together. I definitely think having the Doctor there would be just like another character, just redundant. We already have Book. We don't need two, so I was fine with that decision. Um, Whether to make it R but not have those two characters, I was kind of fine with it. I know making him black and just having that whole be a whole sort of subplot, like people talking about race a lot. I guess you just if because he is a black doctor in the 1930s, it has to be addressed. Like, whoa, how does somebody so young?
Right.
Again, like, he's so young too. It didn't really annoy me or irritate me that it was deviating from the book so much. I thought it was all fine. I thought what Leslie did was a great portrayal, and it is sort of a red herring because where his character does go later, he does kind of take a lot of the heat, and you think, oh, maybe he is the murderer because he's about to kill Poirot here. I didn't really mind it, and I thought it was fine. They kind of downplayed the romance. I mean, they definitely downplayed the romance as opposed to the original, where like Arbuthnot and Mary are just like fucking necking the whole time. Just like,
Right.
Necking? What am I, from the 50s? Anyway.
That's definitely a Sean Connery choice.
I think we should be making out more. So yeah, I didn't mind it. And then they do give a pretty good explanation, like, oh, Armstrong, like, he's the reason I was able to become a doctor at so young because we were in the military together, and I admired this man, and it gave him more stakes with his relationship with Armstrong to why he would want to commit this murder, and I guess be one of the top people that we kind of follow around from all these suspects. So I was ultimately okay with it, and I mean Sean Connery, he did. He did what Sean Connery does. Very small role for Sean Connery. He's barely in the film. He comes in like towards the later half, and then like you said, we just see him making out with Mary a lot the whole time. So, Sean Connery did fine too. Leslie gets to do a little action too.
Sure.
So he definitely gets
Yeah,
a
quite a bit.
lot to do from all our suspects.
Again, like I said, I understand all the choices. I think Sean Connery probably fits more of what I would expect the character to look like, but to your point, they do explain none of it. And to be able to, because there's quite a bit of shifting, I think that they realized that a lot of modern audiences weren't going to get like being super racist against like Italians and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
I think, I think it's just an easier jumping off point
Mhm.
for a modern audience to just be like, oh, it's because he's black. All right, got it. Like that's easy. The doctor easily disposed of. And I can kind of complain about like, does it make sense to throw so much at Leslie Odom Jr.? But the fact that he's able to handle it all pretty cleanly, yeah, I think you're right. Actually, not thinking about it from what you're saying is he's able to be a red herring. He's able to show sort of the race implications of the times.
Mhm.
He's able to be the have a love interest and play that really well. Spar with Poirot in different ways. He comes back as another red herring later that we'll talk about. And yeah, I can't really complain that they deviated if they did so much to sort of just clean up the plot for the movie. So yeah, another one where Sean Connery, he just did Sean Connery. I think it felt kind of like a little Ocean's 11 action where he just showed up on set. It's like, oh, this brought over here. It's like, yeah, that one.
All right, I mean, voice.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, we get so little Sean Connery.
Yeah, I was a little bummed because I was so excited. Ooh, this is like post Bond. He gets to just have a little fun here. Let's see what he does.
Not much.
Okay. Yeah, he does fine with what he does. He has to defend Mary and
I was a
make out with her a
gentleman
lot.
I was a gentleman in the front lines, and you will not talk dishonorably about Mr. Armstrong. It's just the whole thing. It's like she's a lady.
Yeah, she's not a woman. She's a lady. Can I just do my
And,
Sean Connery the whole time?
yeah, that could be fun. So many accents we could play with here.
Yeah.
But no, Leslie Odom Jr. I think he knocks it out of the park. Again, I think that once again I'm saying it, but the movie chose not to just one to one the book, and
Mhm.
I think in a lot of smart ways for film. So it's like let's consolidate, let's move things along, and we'll see this throughout. They condense some things, and we'll talk about as we talk about some of the interviews and stuff like that. They condense some things that don't need to be one to one to the book because the book is trying to extend out this mystery.
Mhm.
The movie should not
Right.
try to do it the way the book did.
Mhm.
So my complaints are like, it's not like the book, but there's very good reason for that. It's a
Mhm.
different medium.
Yeah. And I'll just add one more thing about Arbuthnot. Both of our movies, before we're on the Orient Express, Poirot is on that boat with Mary and Arbuthnot, right? So they're pretty important characters, right? Because they're the first characters we're introduced to who are going to be on the
Mhm.
Orient Express. So what the remake does is they have Mary and Arbuthnot get a little bit of a bigger role than the other passengers on the train, which I think makes sense just because you're introduced to them separately.
Sure.
They don't have such a big role in the original film. They're definitely just other characters. So I think it makes sense that we're introduced to them early because they are gonna have sort of a bigger role throughout the whole film. So I do like what they did with
Mm,
Arbuthnot, and when we talk about Mary, um,
yeah.
I'll get to that too.
Yeah. I'll save. There's a scene, but I think we're going to talk about it when we talk about Mary. So
Okay. I mean, should we just talk about her?
something about Mary. Yeah. I mean, why not? It doesn't
Yeah,
matter what order we do this
yeah,
in.
it doesn't matter. All right, so we have Mary Debenham, portrayed by Vanessa Redgrave in the original.
Vanessa Redgrave.
Not now. Not now. When it's all over, when it's behind us.
and Daisy Ridley in the remake.
I'm sleeping here, where everyone can see me. And I can see everyone.
So Mary Debenham is our sort of governess, sort of the private tutor of children as she's coming back from Baghdad. Again, I already kind of mentioned this. She is going to have a bigger role in the remake. Like I said, we start with her and bring up that other thing you said about Poirot being like infamous. Like she recognizes him as they're waiting for that boat in the remake. She's like, wait a bit, I know that mustache. You must be one Hercules Poirot. And then everybody gets his name wrong. Hercule Poirot. And
I do not fight the lions.
there you go. Very nice. Yeah, and then she's sort of sprinkled throughout the remake. You know, Poirot goes after her pretty aggressively, and in both films, Arbuthnot does come to her defense. We just get a little bit more of her in that remake. In the original, I'm just trying to remember what she did. I know she got interviewed, and I remember her making out with Arbuthnot a lot. I guess they put on this. I don't know if it's a lie to throw off the murder or if it really happened, but like the whole thing about like Arbuthnot has a wife and he's trying to end that marriage, and now he's kind of secretly doing this thing with Mary until that marriage is fully dissolved. So there's more emphasis on the love story between those two characters. So it's really hard to kind of separate them because they are pretty much on screen together the whole time in the original, as opposed to the remake where they definitely have like their own separate things going on.
Yeah, I think he nailed it there. The original, they expand on the relationship more than I think the book does, to be honest. I don't even think the book even gets into anything about like ex-wives and stuff like that. Again, I think Sean Connery might just be playing himself at this point. At this point, but yeah, I mean, like pretty much like she gets interviewed and Hercule gives her a little bit more kind of pressure. He doesn't lay off of her in the interviews. I think this is also the character that kind of is familiar with Hercule and doesn't really like go for the games because like Hercule has a different strategy for every character, and like the way he goes after Mary is kind of like almost like reverse psychology, and she's more to the point, and that's kind of Hercule Poirot's point is that like I'm gonna go everywhere in my conversation with her because it's gonna make her kind of pissed, and it does, and it also makes Arbuthnot pissed, and we see Sean Connery now. See yes, yeah, exactly. Like you said, they're pretty tied together, but for sort of the level of impact that they're kind of supposed to have, like you mentioned, they're introduced so early. We don't really get this early and often portrayal, whereas in a remake, we do get that, and I think there's plenty of strong scenes of them by themselves. There's plenty of strong scenes with them together. I love the scene where character we'll talk about, but Willem Dafoe's character comes in, and he's kind of got this sciencey thing going on. And he's like, "Oh, the racist," and he's like, "Well, if I took this perfectly good red wine and I mixed it with this white wine, I'm gonna ruin them both. Black guy, white lady." And she's just like, I love Daisy Ridley's move here. Like, she just dumps it in. She's like, I like a rosé. Get the fuck out of my face. Racist prick. I don't think anyone here is being spoiled. Given what we know, it's a weird interaction. Like, some of the interactions on the train, given what we know about the ultimate conclusion of these films, like, why'd you do that?
Yeah. You all know each other. You're all friends. Go on.
But, maybe they're all putting on this great performance.
Yeah, that's it.
Daisy Ridley, she gets multiple scenes, and she's very strong in that scene I just described. But I will admit that I was completely distracted because I'm just thinking about Rey and Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'm like, every time she was saying something, she was like, blah, 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 the droids, blah, 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 my lightsaber. She was doing great, but I was distracted. But let's not, in combination, those two just way better than what we saw in the original.
Yeah. I like how you brought up that scene with her mixing the wine. Yeah, she definitely has some good scenes on her own, one-on-one. And she does have a lot of good scenes with Poirot, one-to-one. Like you said, like he was trying to do this thing, where, like kind of being around the bush. And she's like, just get to the point. Or like, are you trying to analyze my handwriting? Like, she's a really smart character,
Right.
She's not oblivious to his methods. So, again, she has that agency. And just seems like a stronger character on her own. We don't really get that from her in the original film. She's with Arbuthnot, I think, all the time. I can't remember any scenes where she's really on her own.
You bring up a great point with that scene with the signature. So the movie, again, smartly decides to, instead of Perot explaining to uh, the doctor and Book what's happening with the signatures, she's like, "You just want to see my signature," and
Mhm.
it's like, "Oh, cool! Now we know that's why he has her signing things." And instead of going back and explaining it like we do in the book, we just knock it out right here in this interview. That's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah,
Like every time I see a scene like that in this remake, I'm like, you know what? I appreciate that because you were respecting my time.
yeah,
And we talk about that often with these films. Is like, please don't
yeah.
don't waste my time.
I mean, I think overall the remake kind of has a better flow like that. Like, we won't kind of beat around the bush. Like, what does that mean? Like, immediately Poirot will be like, oh, that means that, or another character, like you said, Mary is gonna be like, oh, this is what this means right now. Like, we don't dwell on something too long, move on to something else, and then come back
Right.
to it in the remake so often.
which which to be fair to the original is a style of the book,
Mhm.
but I think the remake handles it well. And as we're going through, so that's two characters we've already kind of gone over, without really getting into too many details because the reveal I think will kind of expand out on all these characters once more. But what we get here is instead of doing the multi-interview style, they just kind of knock it out
Mhm.
in one. And I think I appreciate how they did it and where they chose to do some of the exposition. Um, Again, case in point, Daisy Ridley just saying the thing about the signature. Sweet, we don't have to now watch every single person sign,
Right.
and we've established what that is, and the movie did that in a very smart way right there in that scene.
All right. I'm thinking we should go into one of our big characters, and that's Mrs. Hubbard slash
Hell yeah.
Linda Arden, portrayed by Lauren Bacall in the original.
Lauren Bacall,
I mean nothing of the kind. I mean there was a man in my compartment last night.
And Michelle Pfeiffer in the remake.
Someone was rummaging around my cabin in the middle of the night. No one would listen to me.
Mrs. Hubbard, or Linda Arden, our mastermind, the
Mm.
mother of the deceased, or in the grandmother of the kidnapped Daisy.
From a casting perspective, in both films, let me give you just a quick bravo to both films.
Hmm.
I hesitate to kind of give either one of them the edge. Maybe we'll come to a conclusion here, but like Lauren Bacall, and this is where we haven't really talked about this yet, but like in both films, these are ensemble casts. These
Right.
casts are like crazy good.
Murder on the Orient Express. Starring the greatest cast of suspicious characters ever involved in murder.
For the time in the original, the 1974 film, and in the remake. Lauren Bacall is a legendary actress, and she gets to play a legendary actress pretending to be somebody else. And Michelle Pfeiffer, legend in her own right, she gets to chew up a lot of scenery,
Hmm.
and not in a bad way. Usually, when you say that, it's like, oh my god, look at this person, but like, she's over the top. She's throwing quips, and she's like, he said 20 years or 15. Like there's just a lot of fun interactions that we get with her. I think that Michelle Pfeiffer sort of pulls off the role of like moving things along a little bit better. But I think Lauren Bacall really like goes in her bag and goes like over the top stagecraft with her portrayal. It's a very important role. If you don't quite thread the needle with this character, your movie's going to fail. And I think that both of them are able to do their role pretty well. But I'll say this: Lauren Bacall doesn't feel that natural to me, which makes sense given the time and like the type of actress that she was. Like the style was very different at the time. But like she just kind of like goes off and then she just shows up. Like, here's another thing. Here's here's a button. Here's a knife and it's bloody. And she was like in the window, bloody knife. It was like, oh yeah, yeah. Here's my stuff, and Is this what you were looking for? Whereas like Michelle Pfeiffer feels to me like she comes across as like I believe her as Hubbard. Like I believe
Yeah.
her as kind of eccentric old woman who's like kind of like trying to get it. She's like,
Mhm.
hey, Mr. Perot, what's up? But Call doesn't give me that. She just gives me a how could you ever speak to a woman of my magnitude? and Michelle does that a little bit, but like she's a little bit more natural in her portrayal, and I'm not necessarily convinced that she's the stage actress until we get the reveal.
I'll give Michelle Pfeiffer a little more credit on the Mrs. Hubbard portrayal for sure. I think a great place to talk about that is just her introduction in the remake. Like Poirot just gets on the train and immediately she just like attaches to him like a leech or something. Just won't leave him alone. Just talking. He doesn't said one word, and she's just getting on like 5 different subjects before he's even get to his room. So a great portrayal by Michelle Pfeiffer. A really fun portrayal, I think, especially since that character gets to have that dark turn at the later half of the movie. So I think her Mrs. Hubbard for sure portrayed. You know, we're talking about how we read the book, how she was annoying in the book. Because just this woman that you can't get away from, this force of nature that just, if you get anywhere near her, you're going to get sucked in and you're going to lose all that time. So I think she did a great job just with that introduction in the remake.
And I think that it sort of feeds into this idea. One, this character, which we'll sort of reveal, is kind of like a mastermind of sorts, and also is actively trying to distract Poirot from his mission. You know, she's introducing evidence, a lot of red herring evidence, as Poirot says very early in the film. I believe in both films, but I think there are too many clues in this room. You know, it's like, yeah, why are there so many clues? And she does a really good job, Michelle Pfeiffer, of as you mentioned, and really portraying that I'm glommed on you thing. That first scene is so strong, where she just a mile a minute, go, 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 and he's just like, where is the exit? How do I get away from this woman? Like I said, I do not mean chewing up scenery in a bad way, because that is her job, and she's portraying someone that would chew up scenery. It's really well done.
Yeah, and then just going to more of the Linda Arden kind of arc, they give Michelle Pfeiffer more like stuff to do. Like it was like she was like the last one in the room with the body, and it was her like doing the fake voice, pretending to be him, and she's like she opened the window so that to try to throw off Poirot. So she seemed like more of a mastermind in the remake.
It's also more in line with what she should be doing.
Yeah, and then she also has kind of a darker arc too, because at the end, when given the opportunity, she's gonna blow her brains out. Michelle Pfeiffer does a great job with this character. You know, that hilarious, clingy woman who just won't leave you alone, to this woman who's lost everything and she doesn't care anymore, and she's gonna kill herself. So it's quite a range for that character, and I think Michelle Pfeiffer did a great job. Not knocking what Lauren Bacall did, but they just didn't give her that opportunity, I think, in the original film. Yeah.
They didn't. There's so much more for her to do in the remake, to your point. Whereas like Lauren Bacall, she also gets to do the reveal. I guess you figured it out, you clever man. But like Michelle Pfeiffer, she takes the wig off.
Right.
And then her hair comes out, and then the hair under the wig is kind of well done too. And then, like Perot puts his gun down on the table, which is nowhere to be found in the book. But like, hey, I'll run with it. And she's like, I died when Daisy died. Ah, she's gonna shoot Perot. She's gonna shoot herself. There's no bullets, man. It's great. Like, she really does feel like the mastermind in that moment, because just the camera starts to zoom in on her. She, again, like I said, with the wig, the whole portrayal, it feels like the acting is really coming to the forefront. Like, you could see her do something like this on Broadway. You could see her doing a monologue. Like, she is portraying a classical actress that had this horrific event happen to her. And I buy it. I buy it when she's not that. I buy it when she's Hubbard. I buy it when she's Arden. And Michelle Pfeiffer, wow, what a great choice.
I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer did great, but also the way they set up that last scene, they set it up like everybody's sitting like they're at the Last Supper.
Yeah,
Michelle Pfeiffer she's got the Jesus seat, So very interesting artistic choices done with the camera work. I mean, we'll get into that later, but I just wanted to mention that just to reinforce that really shows that she was the one in charge. So I got nothing against what Lauren Bacall did. I think she did a great job. But like I said, I think just Michelle Pfeiffer just had a little more to do. She had a little more fun with, especially with that Hubbard character. So I'll go with that one.
Definitely. And, if you're going to have sort of a mastermind, it really came across in the remake. versus the original, which is like, yeah, all right, yeah, she's in charge. But
Hmm.
like you said, the fact that they would even go into some of that imagery, like the Last Supper, the 12, and all this, I think the visual in that moment was stronger than the the wording in the original, which is like 12, 12 here, 12 that.
Right. Yeah.
Like Sean Connery is really quoted more in terms of like the choice of the 12
Right.
different people than she is. So it's there's no one stepping on her lines. There's no one stepping on her shine in this remake.
Yeah.
She is the mastermind. It's portrayed well. Another great character.
Shall we move on? So I think maybe we can go to the sister and her
Mm.
husband. So Countess Helena Andreni, portrayed by Jacqueline Bisset in the original,
Jacqueline Bisset.
He makes it sound like a poison.
and Lucy Boynton in the remake. And then her husband, Count Andreni, portrayed by Michael York in the original.
Michael York.
And Sergei Polunin in the remake. I'm going to start with the Count in
Okay.
this comparison. So I'm going to start with Sergei. I didn't get him.
If you would.
I didn't get his character. I was
Okay.
confused. He doesn't really have much to do in the remake. He has this kung fu scene in the beginning,
dude.
which
Yeah,
felt
dude.
completely out of place. They kind of justify it by saying he's a famous dancer, but I didn't get it. It seemed not time appropriate at all that he would know to use his legs. And they also mentioned like maybe ties to gangs in him, but I don't know. It took me out of it.
Yeah.
Just by doing that, but those decisions, and then he didn't really do much other than that in the remake, other than just kind of getting mad at Poirot sometimes, and it's just like, all right, whatever. As opposed to Michael York, if I'm trying to protect my wife from this investigation, I think what Michael York did was a lot smarter. You know, not getting aggressive to the lead investigator.
Sure.
You know, making him question like, well, why is he protecting her? Maybe because she's guilty. You know, Michael York, he was on top of it, but he wasn't like overly like protective. Sure. Like he's like, all right, well, we'll be with everybody. You know, I'm not gonna just like shelter her like in this room alone. It wasn't a big role, but I just liked what he had to do better than the remake.
Yeah, it's just cleaner. It fits the characters more, both sort of from the aspect of the book. And look, when you get introduced to Michael York and Jacqueline Bisset in the original, they're just getting on a train. They're wearing nice clothes, so clearly they're important. And they get on a train. That's it. You know, their clothes are nicer. They're clearly important. Everyone is trying to like get them to spend money on stuff. We'll get around to whoever they are later, but you've established visually what I need to see. What I don't need to see is a bunch of paparazzi around the bar or whatever, and he's like, "That's it, buddy." It's like no warning, just kicking people's ass. I agree. It took me out of the moment. I didn't understand why he was like kung fu fighting. Like I just was very confused by the flips and the kicks and the punches, and then like to kind of cap the scene off with like the guy takes a photo and he's like, "Oh, my bad." He just throws his camera on the ground.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. And you know, I understand that these are kind of like famous people, but it also, I don't know, like you're supposed to be kind of laying low. Like
Yeah,
the fact
exactly.
that, like you would think somebody's going to recognize somebody in the remake universe where there's paparazzi around. There's all these different people that he's punching out. Like someone at some point would make the connection, and I just didn't think that it made sense. It's not like they even do much in the original, but like that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
It's like you're not. No, we're diplomats. Leave us alone.
Mm-hmm.
Stop asking me questions. And then he tries to throw a couple red herrings here or there with the grease stain, but like the fighting was just, I was very confused.
Yeah, I didn't really care for the fighting, and just overall his character was just like meh. I didn't really care about him. But the Countess, we have some different portrayals. I'm gonna start with the remake again. Lucy Boynton, again, doesn't really have much screen time, but I think she did much better with her screen time than her counterpart, Sergei, because, she's all drugged out on Bobitol. Bobitol. I
Yes.
love the way she says Bobitol.
Bobitol.
It's great. So it's a very short portrayal, and she's drugged out of her mind, but I think she handled it really well. I totally believed, okay, yeah, this something wrong with this woman that she's drugged out all the time, and then she kind of had that, early Hollywood kind of way of speaking. So I really liked what she did with that character.
She's talking about Barbitol, and like, I don't know, like you said, she's just so zonked out, and it does fit in line with like the question of what her exact involvement is, whether she's contributing to the murder and stuff like that. Like you mentioned, it's a great portrayal. She shows her vulnerability there. It makes sense that she's drugged out, given the fact that like her sister, what happened to her sister,
Right.
and I don't know. It doesn't take much, and that's what I think this movie figures out. It doesn't take much to get that point across,
Right.
and we get it right there. Although I still hate the count, so I'm trying not to take points away from her, but she does a good job.
And Jacqueline Bisset, she does fine. She's not as drugged out as a remake Countess, but I think she has. Well, she definitely has more to do. Not only does she like have like more scenes, but she's also a part of the murder. That's one of the differences between these two.
Sure.
The remake, she doesn't commit the murder, but in the original, her and her husband stab our Cassetti together, which was an interesting choice because I don't think that happened in the book either. I think she was one of the only person who didn't commit the murder.
Yeah,
right?
I think they make it sort of ambiguous. It's implied that she's not involved. Like it's possible that she did participate, but I think that overall, the way it's portrayed, the Count is ultimately trying to protect her at this point, and I think he's acts as a surrogate, more along the lines of what you see in the remake. Keeping her away from it and giving her an airtight alibi.
I do like one sort of thing that kind of happens in the original. It's like when everything's done, like even Poirot is like, all right, I guess you're all free to go. It's like everybody's kind of cheersing them. It's like the two people that were behind that are everybody's approaching are the mother and the daughter.
Yes.
So that kind of showed like these two people were the most affected by the crime that happened. So I don't know, just a nice little moment that the original had. It is a little long because we have to see every character cheers them, which the original does that a lot. But it just states her importance. And while I did like what Lucy did in the remake, again, I don't like what her husband had to do. So if we're kind of putting the couples together, I'm just going to give a slight edge to what they did in the original.
I agree. I think the original, there's more of a line with the doctor about the effects of Barbitol. Could it be used as a toxin? It's like, oh, I guess I've incriminated myself. There's more happening there. And I think you're right. That scene at the end when we get that over-the-shoulder shot of the daughter and the mother, I think it's a good scene, sort of, from that perspective.
Yeah. The
from
flow is
that
terrible.
perspective. Yeah. I think that was not a great choice, but we'll talk about that later.
But it does elevate her character to kind of put her up there with her mother and this revenge plot. So that's why I was bringing that up. It's not my favorite scene either.
Nah, but I do agree that the elevation is there because though she is important and is the sister, ultimately that's what's revealed. I never felt in the remake that she ever took hold of that position where, like you said, the original, at least they've elevated her and shown like, of all of these people, who should be the most upset, and it is those two, and I think the original pulls that off a little bit better. To your point, remake, I think the Count unfortunately does drag down the performance. The Count's not great in the original either, but he does less harm. He's out of the way. I understand the want to, it's almost a 2-hour movie. It's 2017. You want to kind of keep things moving along. It made zero sense to have him fighting people. That time could have been well served with something else.
Yeah.
Even if they wanted to kind of like fake a struggle or something like that. Like if you wanted to do like a fake out with a guy escaping the train. I know it's not really in the book, but they made enough concessions that, okay, I could see that. But like, I don't know, that choice was odd. weirdly enough, would rather just see two people walking onto a train wearing white outfits.
They just have more to do in the original, and what they do, they don't really. Well, I don't want to say they don't waste the time, because they do waste a little bit of time
They
in that
waste time.
original film. Well, you know, it's definitely not as jarring as like some random kung fu at a cafe. It really took me out of it.
Every time
Yeah.
you bring it up, I start seeing it in my head,
Yeah.
and like he almost ends like a ninja. He's like, ah. Like I just
Mhm.
knocked out 3 guys. I'm like, yo, bro, what was that? It's so jarring and unnecessary. And I know we're not supposed to waste a lot of time with this, Dan, but like, what the fuck? He's throwing side kicks, jump kicks, and shit like that. I'm like, yo, what? Hey, that guy did it. I don't know. I don't know why that happened, man. It was just so weird.
So points to the original there.
Yep.
Let's move on to some other characters. I got the missionary, so maybe we
Yeah.
can talk about her. Okay, this is a name change and a race change. So
Mhm.
we have in the original Ingrid Bergman portrays Greta Olsen,
Thou shalt not kill.
Ingrid Bergman.
and then Penelope Cruz as Pilar Estravados. Just throwing it out there, Greta also won an Oscar for this portrayal.
Get the fuck out of here.
She's on screen for 5 minutes. Won an Oscar. Oh, I know, right?
Wait. Let's slow down here. So, from what I recall, Greta Olsen doing in the original, doesn't she basically pretend like she's backwards?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So she does a shitty kind of German accent, pretending to be, for lack of a better word, mentally challenged. She won an Oscar for that.
She won an Oscar for her 5
What?
minutes on screen. Best supporting actress.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to say anything else.
Yeah, I was surprised to find out she won an Oscar, seeing as how it was A, very little screen time, and B, not necessarily the most memorable scene.
What? The little brown children in the, how
You
do
didn't
you
like her-
say,
You didn't like her
backwards?
talking about little brown children?
You know what, man? You know what? Maybe that was the move back then. I don't know. She did her job. Sorry, you shouldn't have told me that, Dan. Now I'm like,
Now you're ripping on her even more.
yeah. No, you know what? It's a strong scene. It's a strong scene. It's a little cheesy. I don't think the accent actually works. But look, if she got an Oscar for this, you know what? God bless her.
Yeah, I thought she did okay with it. I don't know if it's necessarily Oscar worthy, but she definitely portrayed the fact that I'm just trying to be a missionary here, and just been a missionary for some reason. We don't know why until later.
Right.
It's not the strongest performance in the movie even, but I will give her credit. It's more memorable than what Penelope Cruz did. Because
Oh boy,
was Penelope Cruz even in the movie? Because I don't remember her, man.
it's so strange. So like, all right. So Penelope Cruz's character is not in this book. I know you mentioned that, but like,
Yeah.
from what I read, she may be in another like Poirot novelization, but like, she's not in this book. And I think again, probably part of her reason being here is to kind of modernize some of like the different like racial implications and stuff like that. But dude, what's she doing? What's she doing?
I couldn't tell you one
She
thing
quotes
she did.
like Hebrews at some point, like we will all account to God at some point. I don't know. Like, you know what? If you had to compare these two and say which one of these deserves the Oscar, you're goddamn right, the original one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what she does.
I think she's the reason at the end that Poirot decides not to turn them in. But even then, I was like really listening to her lines, what she said. It's like that's gonna make him not want to turn everybody in. It wasn't great, man. It was like I said, it was completely forgettable. I don't mind replacing a character with another character, but you don't really do anything with her. It's Penelope Cruz.
And I was about to say, I don't mind it being Penelope Cruz.
Yeah, and we didn't mention
another alumni.
Exactly. Yeah, we have all these alumni from previous episodes, obviously from our Vanilla Sky and Open Your Eyes episode. So happy to see her again. Doesn't really do anything. Can't even like her interview. I don't remember what she said during her interview.
I don't know
because her interview was sort of interspliced with two other people's interviews too. So Her and another character we'll get to are pretty forgettable in this movie. Unfortunately, they're both kind of the same ethnicity.
True. The Greta Olson account is long. It's a long, kind of drawn out speech to basically get 2 seconds of dialogue where she said something that he would recognize as someone more familiar with American culture would say. And, we can talk about brown kids and backwardsness and all that stuff. But like I said, at least I remember that. I remember that she said it. I'm with you. I know Penelope Cruz is constantly referencing like biblical themes that have nothing to do with the rest of the film.
Right.
So by including, like, swapping the character, who doesn't get enough screen time for you to even justify swapping? It could have just been some fake German chick. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't really matter who was reading Bible quotes. So it felt strange that they decided to swap that character out. And somehow Penelope Cruz, who's a very strong actress, yeah, well, I guess the other actress, she got an Oscar for it. I mean, just, I don't know. I really have not much to say about Penelope Cruz in this movie.
Yeah, they're both pretty meh roles overall, because they're not really strong characters in either the film or even the book. And then Penelope Cruz just really has nothing to do in this movie. So, I mean, she's a huge star, forgettable. So just because I remember more of what Ingrid Bergman did, and I'm not necessarily saying it's Oscar worthy, but it's better than what we got with the remake for sure. I feel like a very underused character in the remake.
If I had to guess, again, I don't know Ingrid Bergman's Oscar history or anything like that, but this sounds like a makeup call.
It sounds like it. Just like, all right, she's done enough bodies of work, kind of like what they did with Paul Newman in Color of Money. Let's just give him the Oscar. We should have given him for The Hustler.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Ingrid Bergman is a strong actress. This role is not her best role.
It's not a career-defining role,
No. Honestly, this should probably go in the trash heap of, like, that's just something they did in the 70s, and we're not going to go too deep into it. And then, I mean, Pilar Estravados. Like, who is Pilar Estravados? What is Pilar Estravados? I don't know. Like, just, I would rather, at that point, just cut the character out of the story,
Yeah. But you need 12 because of the stabs. So that's the only
true.
reason to not cut any number to a lower number, I suppose. Yeah, but ultimately forgettable characters, I think we're both going to just give that edge to the original then. I mean, there's not much to say about her because she doesn't really do much in either film, but much more forgettable in that remake.
That's true. It's a shame, but whatever.
Let's go with Princess Dragomirov next, portrayed by Wendy Hiller in the original.
Wendy Hiller.
You never smile, Madame la Princesse.
My doctor has advised against it.
And Judi Dench in the remake. And I'll just throw her out there just because we're probably going to talk about her too. Her maid, Hildegard Schmidt, portrayed by Rachel Roberts in the original.
Rachel Roberts.
And Olivia Colman. All right, Princess Dragomirov.
An older woman. I think both characters kind of capture what this is supposed to be. Honestly, I don't even think I really have that many notes for this character. I would just say this. Dame Judi Dench. It's Dame Judi Dench, man. She gets as much out of this character as I think anybody could. I want to give you something here, but I don't know if I got it. She plays this really well in terms of, like, she's kind of a jerky old lady. She'll rip into you. She thinks she's better than everybody, and I mean that's about it. She plays a great a grande dame. She's nailed it.
Yeah. Again, this is another character that doesn't have much screen time, but yeah, old, rich, mean lady. Kinda, and they both nail it. It's really hard to pick a portrayal between the two of them, so I think their handmaid is going to kind of help us with the edge of these characters. So I don't really have anything to add. I think they both did a fine, serviceable job. Nothing necessarily memorable. They both had dogs. Cool. So with that, I'm just going to move on to Hildegard Schmidt. I'll start with the remake. Olivia Colman, great actress. I love her in Peep Show. If anybody likes Peep Show, it's a great, hilarious show. Uh, I'm gonna go say what they said with Penelope Cruz. Just really underutilized here. This is a really great actress, Olivia Colman, and I don't really
No,
remember
it's
her
just,
doing much at
it's
all. I
just
know she talks to Poirot in German, gets some information, then she's fingered at the end, being like, "You're the cook." It's like, wait, when did we establish that? Because
yeah,
at least in the original, like one of the interactions that's actually better with Poirot and somebody he's questioning, I think, is between him and Hildegard Schmidt in the original. It's like
I agree.
he's just like asking her random questions. It seems like random nonchalant questions, and like, "I knew you were also a pretty good cook too, right?" Yeah, I was a really good cook. Yeah, all the ladies say that, even and it's just that one little moment right there.
Yep.
I was just like, okay.
Yep.
So and now I know who your character is, and you just slipped right there, and I saw you slip, so that was a fun little scene. Don't have a moment like that in the remake.
I do want to point to that actual moment that you're describing there, which I think the original actually does a better job of throughout the film, which is people get caught
Mm-hmm.
more obvious
Right.
in the original. And that, to your point, you're taking this kind of side character who's just kind of off to the side doing maidly duties. And, she's covering when it comes to the handkerchief. That's kind of her big claim to fame in both films, is that she doesn't want her lady, as it were, Princess Dragamov or whatever, to be kind of like a suspect. So she's trying to throw a little distraction when it comes to the handkerchief and stuff like that. You're right. In the original, that one moment sells that over the top because she knows that she fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
As famously quoted. um, and you're right. Like, I don't even recognize that happened in the remake until they basically flash back to it.
Yeah.
That your ladies would never know that you were a good cook.
Right.
So, okay, that's another point in that original direction, which is you take this strong actress in Miss Coleman, you take these strong actresses in Penelope Cruz, you give them these characters that actually, as kind of meaningless as they are actually meaningful in the margins.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of revelation that happens with this maid between the handkerchief, the cook, and all this stuff. Like, we're learning quite a bit about all of their relationship to the Armstrongs, and it just doesn't translate as well in the remake.
So again, I really don't have much to add to that. They are small roles, but just that again, that little bit with that interview, I'm going to give the edge to the original. With I just lumped those two together with Princess Dragamorph and Hildegard Schmidt. Just underutilizing a lot of these actors in the remake. As we get down the list, we'll see. Let's go into the employees of Cassetti. We have Hector McQueen, portrayed by another alumnus, Anthony Perkins, in the original.
Anthony Perkins.
Seems like I'm kind of incriminating myself.
And then we have Josh Gad in the remake.
Well, he was in perfectly good health. He had his enemies.
And the other employee is the valet, another name change here. George Gilgood, another alumnus from Arthur episode, portrays Edward Beddoes.
Beddoes. John Gielgud. Mr. Beddoes.
And then we have Derek Jacobi as Edward Henry Masterman, which is actually the name he was in the book.
The Beddoes thing, what a weird name change.
I couldn't find anything on why they changed the names in the original. I mean, and even when they changed the names in the remake, it makes sense because, it's a completely different ethnicity. It wouldn't make sense if somebody who looks Spanish has a Swedish last name.
Sure.
So I get that. I don't understand, like, old white dude. We couldn't give him the same old white dude name from the book. But that's besides the point. Let's talk about her portrayals. I'm going to start with the easier one. I'm going to start with McQueen. Very different portrayals here from Anthony Perkins and Josh Gad. Anthony Perkins almost sort of portraying the Bateman from the Bates Motel character. Having that mother complex with Sonia Armstrong, just like how kind she was to him, and he was interested in acting, and she was an actress, and she was gonna maybe take him under her wing, and so like he fucks up early in the movie by revealing the connection there. Josh Gad, a much darker portrayal, we'll say. This alcoholic, chip on his shoulder because his dad wrongfully accused the wrong person in the murder. And we get an action sequence out of Josh Gad trying to flee and burn up documents.
Perkins, like you said, it feels referential. Like you mentioned, it does feel like I've seen Perkins do this before. And that's probably why he was picked, just to do that portrayal. He comes across as very nervous. He fiddles with his tie. He, like you mentioned, he fucks up immediately, And I was actually kind of surprised tonally by that. Like, it just felt like, oh, well, I guess, all right. like I thought that Perot was going to have to kind of, work for his supper, as it were, a little bit more. And Anthony Perkins is just like, and then he's like looking around in places and he's like shuffling off. It's just like, well, I know something's up, dude.
Yeah, Anthony Perkins has a lot of these long, awkward stares. Like, he does that a lot for Cassetti. Like, all right, leave me alone. Okay, sure, boss. Well, he's long, awkward. So it's like, let's make it a little more obvious.
Because Josh Gad, they really like lean into the fact that like he's a drinker, and I think that is kind of important from an evidence perspective. I'm trying to remember the book. I actually don't recall them actually leaning into it that much because I don't remember that little piece of evidence, but it helps. It's a good addition in terms of like Josh Gad is, I don't know, he's a character actor for sure, and I would say Anthony Perkins falls in that category, but Josh Gad doesn't give up the game so early. It gives us a little bit more time in the questioning of what's going on, whereas Anthony Perkins feels like he just kind of like hyperdrives the movie into, oh, these people are suspects.
Right.
And I thought there was more time to kind of sit back and say, what happened to Mr. Cassetti? What happened to Mr. Ratchet? And we don't get that with Perkins.
Yeah, it's a much slower burn with Josh Gad's McQueen. And like I said, he does get an action sequence. It does lead us to believe that he is the murderer. So we get a little bit of that in the remake.
Pretty good action scene too.
Yeah, pretty intense stuff for a guy with a funny mustache. And he does have a little. Again, they bring out the race card again. Like, he says, I usually don't judge a man by the color of his skin. But then he's like, well, look at the Latin guy. He's like, I thought you don't judge people on race. Well, it depends on the race.
Yeah.
So a lot of.
It's a funny line. Look, I'm okay with it because it's in the style of like what the book comes across. People are across the border. Italians are skeptical of British people. British people are skeptical of French people. None of them like people from India. It's like the Italians. They have a predisposition for stabbing. Like all this like race is a factor in the book because that in itself is a red herring. People think that Foscarelli in the book, they think that he's like, check the Italian guy because someone got stabbed, or like, or the women, they have they're feeble and prone to emotion. So Josh Gad helps us, as we saw as well with the Daisy Ridley scene, helps us kind of reiterate that like these people are skeptical of each other based off of race. He doesn't trust Britonners, whatever the hell that is. And he definitely doesn't trust the Spanish guy. So, keep those eyes open. No, Josh Gad, I think he does a lot.
Yeah.
Honestly.
They gave him a lot more to do, for sure, than Anthony Perkins. Like, Anthony Perkins plays like pretty heavily in the beginning, but after that, you really don't see him until the very end. Yeah. Yep. So, again, just because he gets a little more screen time and he has more to do, it's not like boring. It's pretty memorable. We said he has a nice action sequence, and he just does a really good job portraying that character. Like you said, not giving up the ghost too soon.
Yep.
So I will give a little bit of the edge over there for the remake. Then we go to the valet, George Gilgood, who we loved in Arthur, as Edward Beddoes, and then Derek Jacobi as Edward Henry Masterman. Very small roles.
Super small. Yeah, I think my predisposition for George Gilgood definitely it tainted my watch because I was very excited to see him. I was very excited to see him as a butler.
Yeah, again, hey, we like him as a butler.
I was excited when, which has nothing to do really with the movie, but when he said spotted dick, because it reminded me, should I wash your dick, sir? Like, I don't know. I really enjoy him as an actor, and I enjoyed his portrayal here, which is like the same thing. It was like, here's another guy being a dick to this really capable butler, and in the end, he kind of gets his comeuppance, or excuse me, he gets the ability to kind of like
Right.
elevate himself. I don't remember much of the remake. You may have to help me here.
I do remember Derek Jacobi. He has some things that aren't exactly, I don't remember from the original or the book. I think he's dying of a disease, so he's a little more curt, I guess you could say, to his employer. He was like, I think the line was, "Did you leave this here? If I had a message for you, sir, it wouldn't be like in a letter or something." It was pretty aggressive what he said to him. Really small role in both films, really.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to pick the better one. I mean, I do love George as well, but again, it's just like I don't really know if either of them did anything that's really better than the other.
I'll say this based off of what you literally just said. I'm actually going to have to lean towards the remake because although the disease wasn't really a part of the book, the disposition was. He does not like his boss. And just in that moment, it's apparent in that moment. So I think it fits the plot and explaining something that happened in the book better than Beddoes, who one doesn't have the same name. Two, I don't think I ever really got that take off of him. It's like, yeah, his boss is hard on him, but I didn't really get he didn't like his boss. And that made him a suspect in the book.
Right.
That's kind of important. And because I didn't quite get that from the original portrayal, I'm going to lean towards the remake. Even though I like the original actor more. I just liked that he was in it, and I thought it was fun to see him, but I don't think it helped the story.
I see. I'm going to just give it a push because I really think it was such a small role. I don't really think there was anything there to really make me prefer one performance over the other. So I get what you're saying. I made me have to watch the original again because I barely remember what he did as Beddoes. And again, the name change. Why do you gotta change the name, man? There's nothing wrong with Masterman.
So weird. And kind of getting back to a point, I think both of these films, in some respect, almost deserve a rewatch because it's easy to get locked into the things that are big and flashy. In both films, it's hard to get into the margins because there's so many damn characters. Some people stick out, some people don't.
Right.
George Gilgood's portrayal is just fun because it's him. So that's really in both these films a strong point is that because you have an ensemble cast, even if someone's not doing something, you're just kind of excited that they're there. So I could see the push, but for story aspects, I'm going to stick with my guns. The remake, slight lead because it feels more like the book.
No problems there. Let's move on. We only got a couple characters left. Let's go to Hardman.
Okay.
Our detective kind of guy. Hardman, portrayed by Colin Blakely in the original, and Willem Dafoe in the remake.
And who are you?
Good old Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe.
Already kind of mentioned him, so I'm going to start with the Willem Dafoe portrayal. So he's pretending to be a German professor in the remake who doesn't quite like the mixing of the colors, Reggie. And then, but it's great though. I think what he does because he has this terrible German accent the whole time in the film, and he's making all this racist shit. And then as soon as it's like, "Who are you really?" and then he's like. You could just see Willem Dafoe's face completely change, and he's like, "Well, actually, I'm not racist. I'm actually half Heeb myself, He's like, "What? Where did this come from, dude?" It's a fun turn that Willem Dafoe has that is definitely not there in the original.
Gets so many kind of good scenes. I'm a little biased because I saw Willem Dafoe pretty recently in a movie called The Lighthouse, and it's a very good movie, but a very strange film. Highly recommend it. He gets so many little opportunities to do all this weird stuff before the turn that I don't know. It's a lot of fun. I'm trying to remember more so in the original. I'm trying to remember the book. That's a change, right? The German professor. That's not quite
Uh,
what he's doing. Right?
yeah, I don't remember exactly what he was pretending to be before that.
I think he was pretending to be an American, but then we find out what type of American he is. So I I don't know. It doesn't really matter what he was originally, to be honest. But like Willem gets to have a lot of fun in this role,
Hmm.
and there's moments where you're like, "Geez, bro, like why you being so racist?" And then like the half heave line, which is still kind of problematic, but like it's it's fun. Like you said, when you have an actor like this, give them that type of space, and
Hmm.
like for him to go from like crazy accent to I'm just an American, regular everyday cop. It's fun, and I think he really does emotively pull off the
Right.
fact that he was in love with a French maid.
Yeah. I saw the struggle more, like in his face, like when he was talking about her, especially at the end of the movie. He's like, it was just an old guy, and she was so much younger. I told her she'd be with anybody else, but every date she was there on time.
Yeah,
Small line, but very effective what he does with it. Again, it's these roles aren't really huge, but what he does with the time he has, it's really memorable. Willem Dafoe's really great in this
he's
movie.
a great actor,
Yeah.
and just pulls it off. I think from what I remember in the original, I think it is more kind of a line with what the book did. But again, that's not always a positive, as we're finding out.
Right.
And I don't really remember what the hook was for him to, show that he was in love with her. I think maybe a line about like foreign girls. I remember that from the book. I don't really remember what happens in the original movie,
Right.
and that happens quite a bit in this original film, where I I know the general story, but sometimes what's going on doesn't hook me enough that I even remember what each individual person does.
Right. Yeah, I don't really remember him too much in the original film. He comes in very late, and I barely even remember him speaking because I feel like it was mostly Poirot, just like you're exactly this. You're not who you say you are, and uh, he doesn't have much to do in that original
Yeah,
film. I mean, especially compared to what Willem Dafoe does in the remake.
yeah, yeah. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I think really when he's like he comes in and says, I'm a detective. He's like, can you prove it? He like hands Albert Finney a card, and
Business
then Albert Finney,
card.
yeah, and he just hands it back, and it's like, well, there's more.
No, he hands it
That,
after he gets the card. He hands him a picture of the
that's what it
girl.
was.
That's what he
Right.
gets.
That's right. He hands him a picture and then he like reacts
Yeah.
because it's the girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Willem Dafoe just so much more to do there.
So much more to do, so much more fun to watch.
Yep.
It's every time he was on the screen, you're fixed on him because he
Yep.
was going to do something, and he delivered like every time he was on the screen. So
Totally. I mean, it takes two to tango, and that rose scene is strong because Willem Dafoe is like established this like pseudo German character that has, I guess, a taste for eugenics. Very interesting. Given that the movie takes place in 1930, like four.
yeah.
A little foreshadowing, huh? But yeah, great character. Don't really remember the original. Points to Willem Dafoe.
All right. And I saved the worst for last. The least memorable character I feel like in either film are, I guess, Car Tycoon. We have Dennis Quilly as Antonio Foscarelli in the original, and then he was changed in the remake. It's Manuel Garcia Rulfo as Beniamino Marquez. This is the guy who used to be a chauffeur for Mr. Colonel Armstrong, and then he found fortune in the car business on his own. Like I said, I saved the worst character for last. He's a very forgettable character in both films. Even in the book, he's not really that big of a character from what I remember. I will say this, I think he's a little more fun in the original.
I was leaning that way myself. To your point, in the book, Foscarelli more or less serves as a red herring because our characters, some of our main characters, are more or less racist. Let's call it what it is. They assume that an Italian person is more likely to use the the
The
tool
knife.
of stabbing. Yep, that's what they like to do.
especially
Apparently,
Michio Book. He's like obsessed. It's like when we interviewing the Italian, we have to interview the Italian, which is I'm surprised they didn't do that in
I know
the original.
it's such a funny kind of beat
Yeah.
in the book that like finally we're going to interview your Italian.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's like you mentioned, there's not much there. Fuscarelli is, I mean, I guess to an extent they're all guilty, but given the evidence that we know, not more guilty than anybody else.
Right.
So it doesn't make a lot of sense to focus on him. And like you said, in the original, it's more fun. It just is.
Yeah.
He leans into the character portrayal a bit.
Right. Yeah.
I think he even has like the over the top look. Probably again, the word racist has come out a couple times. Probably a little racist, but I don't know. Hey, look, it fits the story and he's interesting. I felt like in the remake, he just feels like a character from like Party Down that's like, doing some random dialogue. I didn't really get it, in the remake.
Yeah, he's very forgettable in the remake. I think he has 2 scenes, maybe. His interview, Penelope Cruz's Polaris Stravatos, and I think it's Hardman's interview. I think all 3 of them are kind of interspliced, so you never really focus on just one, and they're kind of quick cuts, so you never really get to see his character. You don't really see his character interact with other characters too much in the remake. So it's just completely forgettable for me. At least, like, I remember in the original Foscarelli, like, he's talking to Poirot, he says something, he's like, oh, I figured something out. I helped you solve the crime? He's like, not really, but I mean, something you said did help, so yes. It's
Yeah.
like, I did! He's having fun, he's one of the more fun characters. It doesn't have a lot to do, but certainly more memorable than what happened in the remake.
To your point, we spend more time with him because in the book he is sort of like suspect number 1 originally, at least for some of our characters. Yeah, I think they spend the appropriate amount of time with him in the original. And to your point, in the remake, they just kind of jump around. I think also the remake is trying to, as I described before, ascribe sort of more modern racism
More
to the
modern.
film. Yeah, like versus the racism du jour in the 1930s. So, more focus on uh, Spanish and like black people versus Indians and Italians in the original. And I get it because I think you'd have to spend some time explaining what is even happening. It's like why are they bagging on this Fuscarelli guy? And you have to be like, I think you'd have to make more of your characters more racist. And I think smart cut. Like, look, am I going to sit here and bitch and complain because they're not portraying the racism properly? No, it's like you've added, like we've used this word before, but like you've added surrogates. So we were worried that Mr. Marquez, I'm afraid he'll be hanging for just his last name, or Arvinaut. Perhaps he'll be the scapegoat because of the color of his skin. So they do quickly kind of like show that there are racial implications at play when it comes to the suspects while not being necessarily true to the novel. It's true to the spirit, and I think that a modern audience will get what they're trying to say. The original, I don't know, like you see it, but they're not really explaining what's happening with some of the racial implications. So I think it falls flat. But I think in this case, Fuscarelli gets more time on screen and is just more fun to watch. And I believe that character a little bit more than Marquez.
Yeah, I don't mind the racial thing, the whole changing
Yeah,
it, and like, oh, Marquez, like with that last name, you better look into him. So like, yeah, they brought in the race thing, but that's not necessarily anything his character's doing. That's
Right.
things other characters were talking about when that
Right.
character's not around. So again, it's just like, show me him because I need to see this guy because he's barely in the movie. I forget what he looks like. So he's just small role in both movies, but he just has a little more to do in the original.
I like to, I guess, add the inclusion of another character, in my opinion, which is the evidence. They make some different choices with the evidence in the films. I guess just to go over that very quickly, we don't need to harp. Mostly, specifically, the knife. Do you think we need to stab Michelle Pfeiffer?
I don't know if we need to, but it definitely, you know, makes you think she's innocent after she gets stabbed.
Yeah.
So it's another red herring. It's just among all the red herrings in the movie. So I had no problem with it. It did seem like a little intense, like for not kind of coming out of nowhere. Like, wow, instead of just finding the bloody knife. But, you know, we're completely confused, and it's just another thing to throw us off.
Yeah.
So I didn't really mind it.
It's an interesting misdirection, I think, for anyone that like was unfamiliar with the subject material. I think that it could throw you off the case. And if you are familiar with the subject material, given the fact they've already made some changes throughout the film, perhaps they're going a different route with
Right.
this ending. So I think that the way evidence is portrayed in the remake is in line with what we've been saying thematically throughout, which is it the bones of the story are there, but there are choices that are made to really make this flow a lot better. And to that point, that evidence as well is part of that character building in this universe, which is the story flows. It just flows so much better
Right.
in the remake than the original.
Yeah. I actually want to. That's where I wanted to go next, was actually the flow of the
Sure.
movies. I guess I'm going to talk about the original first. The original definitely moves a lot slower. It does something that we've talked about in the Poseidon adventures. It's where we see one character do something. Now we got to see all the characters do that same thing over and over again. The original does that a lot. We're introduced to each character one by one at the train station. We see each character one by one kill Cassetti, and they give a little speech, which, you know,
For my
just
daughter.
exactly, you know,
For my wife.
it drags it out. It reestablishes their relationship to the Armstrong case, but
Yeah.
it's a little, you know, you think about it, it's like, wait, there's a great detective in the next room. You're gonna be talking the whole time.
First of all, I was thinking that because, like, in my head, I was like, because he woke up several times throughout the
Yeah.
night, like, see things. I'm like, well, he didn't solve this case. They were just like proclaiming what the fuck they were doing the entire time.
And he
It's
just
just
heard
like,
it. Yeah.
for the little Daisy, she was too sweet. and for my employer, I'm like, yo, shut up, stop talking, and get stabbing.
So there's, yeah, again, that scene doesn't have exactly the best flow because it's one at a time, and again at the end, like I said, when everybody's cheersing the mom and daughter, again it's one at a time, which is a little slow. So I don't like it just because of the pacing, but I do like sort of that reinforcement of like why every character is here, and just like,
Sure.
okay, this it's stupid to say out loud before you stab somebody why you're stabbing them, especially when the greatest detective is in the next room. But it does do a nice job of like, oh yeah, that's who they are. Then the remake, I'm sorry, the original also shows like some flashbacks sometimes where you could see where they were the night that Daisy was kidnapped, or just like you could see the relationship just to the Armstrongs in general. I thought that was nice on that part, just to help me figure out who everybody was, especially if you hadn't read the books. I think it really clarifies that. But the flow is just, it's terrible. It's terrible when it comes to flow.
Yeah.
So
No,
it's a double-edged sword in the original.
I agree. I think that you're making some strong points. That scene, as long as it is, for me, because I already read the books and I actually ended up watching. I went out of sequence this time, so I watched the remake first. Mostly because time constraints. It took me a while to read the book, so by the time I was ready to watch the remake, so that my partner, my wife, could watch it with me. We watched the remake because I knew that she wasn't going to want to watch the original. I liked that. I think that it was unnecessary, but like for me, watching it again, I was like, cool. This is a nice little button up. I'm gonna be able to like have this discussion with you easier now that I've seen this. But in terms of filmography, no, don't do this.
Yeah.
This is not bad idea. When you talk about flow, the remake condenses things. It takes in the book, everyone gets multiple interviews in the book.
Right.
Because we don't know what's going on. The remake's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Look.
One and done.
One interview, maybe we'll intersperse some other things that need to come back later on. It flows so much better. It just flows so much better. Even the stabbing scene, it's more kind of like montage versus this like, I'm doing this for my late friend.
Right.
I'm doing this for my sister. And we even get a pause for like the sister stab because then the husband has to come in. So even that takes longer.
Mhm.
And then it's followed, to your point, by the glass clink, which I found it's a little strange, in my opinion, for them to be so celebratory in the original film with what has just transpired. Because at that point, Pearl was like, you know what? You guys got this. And like, oh, we got this? Hugs, kisses, champagne. Yeah, we did it. We got yeah. I'm like, really? Like, couldn't you just, Mr. Perot, thank you for your understanding in this particular case. We've all been through a lot of harm, and we appreciate you understand. Nah, pour one out for Daisy Armstrong. I'm like, I just thought that was so weird, man. I don't know about you.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I guess that is a little bit weird to celebrate after getting away with murdering somebody. I just thought it was nice just to reestablish who these characters were, and just be
Yeah,
like, okay, cheers, ladies, and just like
it's
give praise to the women you're trying to kind of like, this is for you and this is for you.
mhm.
But yeah, it is a little strange that they're not a
it's a,
little more somber.
yeah. See, it's a muddy film, and that's why I'll kind of allow for that over long ending because I think it does in a cheesy way, but I think it does sort of wrap things up and it's like,
Mhm.
all right, that's right. That guy cares because he was a chauffeur.
Right.
Okay, that guy was army friends with him. So like it helped me remember what everyone was
Yeah.
doing. I was also thinking the exact same thing you were, which is you guys are really loud in a compartment right next to the world's greatest detective, explaining your motivation, who you are, what you're doing. And it's like I'm not convinced that he just the only time he wakes up is for when someone presses the
Yeah.
button to call a conductor. So it's like, yeah, you told him what you did. In the remake, I found it a bit strange the way they ended because it's you do get the 12 disciples scene, you get the additional sort of I'm gonna kill myself thing,
Well, what
and
about
then
before that though? Because before that, the Arbitnot starts shooting
mm,
Pororo. So there was a moment there when I was watching it, thinking like, he's like, I can't put this on you, Mary, for a crime I did. I thought like maybe they are changing the ending here. Maybe they're just gonna put it on Arbitnot instead of all of them. So again, another red herring. But what do you think of that little action
I
sequence on the train?
I think that it's a strength of the remake. They know what happens.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you've read the book, if you're watching the movie, it's likely you have some understanding of the subject material. By before I mentioned I didn't quite like it, but now in retrospect I do. Changing Arbonnett's race, making the love interest more apparent, which then you get to play back right here in this big climactic scene. I don't know what's going to happen because this wasn't in the book.
Right.
Perot didn't get shot. Is he okay? Is he going to get I don't know what's going to happen. So to your point, I appreciate it, even though I tend to be more of a purist with things like this. I think the movie has built up enough good graces and made enough smart choices that I was like, okay, yeah, let's see where you go with this. And Poirot even gets to go back and say they're like a sharpshooter at close range that maims, a doctor that knows where to shoot but not kill. Yeah, it plays into Poirot again as well. Like getting shot actually matters for him. Michelle Pfeiffer getting stabbed actually matters for the film because this guy's picking his spots and it shows their own understanding of the stakes. I think this movie does a better job of trying to throw both Poirot and ourselves off of the
Hmm.
scent.
Yeah, I like the inclusion of the action sequence with Arbonnet at the end. You get one more action sequence before the final climax. It does throw you off if you've seen the movie, the original movie, or read the book. Plays with expectations. And, I always appreciate that when they try to do something different. And then it leads to our ultimate climax, and it worked. It had a good flow to it. It didn't take me out of it. Like, oh, now there's a weird action sequence all of a sudden. It was a pleasant surprise, I think.
I didn't find myself clock watching the remake.
Yeah.
You know, I find that oftentimes, specifically like the producers recently, that's a good example, where I'm sitting there, I'm like, how long is this going to continue? The remake did a bunch of choices that, like, early on too, that if you're a purist and you were going to be out, you would have been out right there. But if you were ready for a different take on this story, they established very early on, they're like, we're going to do this our way. And every choice that they can make, for the most part, minus kung fu fighting, most of the choices that they make were like, okay, yeah, I get that. And even like listening to some of the interviews, because I just recently read the book, I was like, oh wow, they combined the two, and like that happened early and often. I was like,
Mhm.
you know what, I understand why they did that. I understand this choice. I understood all the choices, so I couldn't be mad by them making them.
Yeah, it just moved a lot faster in the remake, and it's much appreciated because it was just so slow the way it moved in the original film. It was, you know, you're talking about how close it is to the book. The book
It's
can go slow because it's a book. You can't do that in
right,
a movie.
right.
So I really appreciated what the remake did with the flow.
And even like the book, it's not that long of a book, which is why I was able to actually read it
Yeah.
and watch both films within a 2 week span. But like a lot of the exposition in the book are things that are happening in their head, their side
Hmm.
conversations with Perot that would not be acceptable in a film. It's like we mentioned Daisy Ridley combining things with the signatures, the grease stain,
Hmm.
Arbonat being black actually matters because like we knock out racial relations in this like concise, quick way. This style, I would say, stylistically, the film really hit its stride. And for a movie that's almost 2 hours long, it doesn't feel that long. You know, it
No.
feels like an appropriate amount of time spent with everything. So I appreciated it.
Should we go on with the rest of the ending in the remake?
Sure, sure. So we have this kind of departure in the film, and to an extent, I found it a little cheesy, but I knew what they were doing. You know, you took the 12 and then you made this sort of allegory or connection to Jesus
Hmm.
with the Last Supper. They have everyone outside of the train sitting at this like makeshift table, and Poirot is going over everyone's sort of motivation, who they are, what their connection is to the Armstrongs, and it ultimately sort of coincides with, as we mentioned before, Michelle Pfeiffer taking her off her wig and saying, "Yeah, I did it, and I do it again." um, and then like this fake out, almost like, is she going to kill Poirot? Is she going to kill herself? It's a very strong scene, and it's once again it's concise. It takes what we see in the original and condenses it into this very kind of quick, snappy scene. What was your take on that?
I thought it was overall a good addition, honestly, because it really reinforced just like how broken these people were just because of the act of one man, and
Right.
that their vengeance was like just so justified because the ramifications of what he did and just what how it affected so many people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was really well done, and we talked about the murder scene where they show everybody killing him one at a time, and this is for your sister. Ah! And, little cheesy, connects people. I really like how they did it in the remake. No dialogue, just it's got this really somber, emotional piece of music playing in the background, and
Mm-hmm.
just see everybody just going up and stabbing. It's pretty emotional, and
Yeah, it
it
is.
got me choked up a little bit. It's pretty intense and strong. So
So,
I really like how they did it in the remake.
and it homages to the original with like you get that blue tint. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's quick, much quicker. Like you said, I'm more emotive actually because I'm seeing their take, and it reinforces the idea of like Poirot, which he has to come to this conclusion. I think that this is another thing the remake does well, to an extent. I think by having Penelope Cruz's Pilar being sort of the connection to the end, I think it's not as strong as it could be,
Hmm.
but it's strong enough where Poirot is like, "Hey, I don't give a fuck about who any of you guys are. Like when the cops come, I'm gonna tell them what's going on." And like you have this other tense moment, which is Perot going to sell these guys out,
Hmm.
and he has to be convinced. Whereas in the original, and it fits more like the book, which is, look, there's two things that could have happened here. Here's one, and I know you're not going to agree with one, but when I'm done telling you what two is, I bet you're going to want to hear one again. uh, and that fits the storyline a little bit better in terms of the book. But the remake, the way they do it is so good, which is just like my ethics are telling me to tell on you, all of you, but slept on it and thought about it. You know what? We're good. You
Yeah.
know, and they get to have like kind of like one last plea for their lives, and it's a nice change actually. I think.
I think the remake does it a lot better for one major reason. It's Poirot deciding it. In
Mm,
the original and in the book, he doesn't decide it. He goes, Monsieur Book, it is your train. Whatever you decide, we'll go there. It's like, what? What? Why are
yeah.
you deciding? I didn't like that when I read that in the book. I was happy to see that they actually put it on the burden on Poirot, right?
Right.
You're not getting away out of this one easily, man. This is your call right here, okay? So I
Yep.
like that the remake just was like, yeah, we're not gonna let this guy who gets prostitutes decide. We're gonna put it on Poirot. It made sense. It's a better decision than what they did in the book.
Yeah, and it really makes Poirot work,
Yeah.
which is not something that you see really in the original film, and not even really in the book. It's like Poirot has to like make a choice here, you know, and he's conflicted, which
Yeah.
goes back to your point about the lost love. Like we get that background, so it's like Poirot likes balance. That is played out very much so in this remake.
Yeah.
At first, when I saw it, I was like, I think it's a little cheesy that like they more or less made his superpower balance, but it comes back into play right here, which is here are the scales of justice. Here's a man that kidnapped and killed a small child, and it like look at how many different people this one like as they said, a crime should have one victim. You know, one murderer, one victim. This has so many victims, and Poirot finally kind of comes to this conclusion that you know what, me sending you guys to jail isn't really justice. You know, there is no justice in this story, so I'm
Yeah.
out. You know, like good enough. It's an arc.
Yeah.
It's an arc, bro. I like it.
Yeah, he has a conflict and then he has to resolve it. It's an arc. It's what you want in your movies. It makes the characters more interesting, especially once they make the decision and stick with it. So I like that he was the one with the burden of making the decision of what happens to all these people. And I think they did a good enough job of like making us sympathize with them enough where we were like, yeah, please let them go. This guy was an asshole. He killed a kid, killed 5 people like all together because of that, and these people's lives are ruined. Yeah, Poirot, come on, let's do the right thing. Live with your imbalance. If it's just this once, it's fine. You know. So I really liked what they did. The ending in the remake.
Totally. And even as both of us have read the books, I was, you know, it got me back into the story. I'm like, oh shit, what's going to happen here? You know, like it's a great addition because even given everything you know about the subject matter, you don't know what's going to happen here. So for the person that's kind of sitting there and like, this is what's going to happen. That person's that person. What happens here? And it writes its own story, which, look, given that's what at this point 73 years after the book's written, you know, I like that they took their own tale, and even though it's still takes place in an older time, they modernized it and they made it make sense for people today. So pretty well done in terms of ending. So edge to the remake.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to talk about the beginnings really quickly? Because we already talked about the beginning a little bit in the remake. We need to talk about the beginning in the original, just how that starts, because they are different.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, the remake starts off with Poirot just looking for those 2 perfect eggs before he goes on to solve a crime, which we already pretty much discussed in detail. The original, though, interesting choice with the original. We start with a bunch of headlines about Daisy Armstrong, and then it's just headline after headline with the most dramatic music you could possibly play. Dun! Dun! Like every fucking time. So it's a very long introduction in the movie, and if you're not familiar with the source material at all, you're just gonna be like, what am I watching here? It doesn't make sense, and it kind of gives it away because because we spent so much time with this Armstrong case that well, that's gonna come into play somewhere, and so I know that's important. That it's not gonna just be a random murder on this train.
Right.
So I didn't like it for a couple reasons. One was because it was so long, And number two is it kind of gives away a big plot point in the movie a little early, and I don't think that was the right place to put in the Armstrong case. I think they should have saved it for later.
I think so. I think the remake puts it in a better spot in the
Mm-hmm.
movie. I'll give the original this that like I think the original does a better job of defining the Armstrong case and how important it is. The problem, to your point, is that it's too early. And what else are we going to talk about? What else is this about? If you spend 4 minutes at the beginning of the movie with headlines, recreations, this person getting stabbed, there's so much exposition about something that then, like, what is the movie's called Murder on the Orient Express. And you spend the first 3 minutes at least looking at headlines of this like kid murder, and you're like, well, like you mentioned, that has to be important. So like now you're already on high alert. What the fuck does this have to do with everything else I'm about to see? And they don't make it apparent for an hour what any of that was about. It's like, oh man, that baby murder thing was crazy, right? I'm on Monsieur Poirot. I'm on a train and I'm on a ferry. I don't feel very well. I'm eating dinner and dinner could be better. Sir, $15,000 is not enough. And like, if you're paying attention, which I think we are, what was that baby thing about? I don't know. You're right. It once again, which is why I'm glad I read the book first.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I don't watch movies like this without
Right.
reading the book, because I'm like, I want to be surprised, man. So strange choice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel bad because if it was somewhere else, I think I would like it. But at the beginning, I don't think I like it very much there.
Yeah, I didn't like it in the beginning. I didn't like exactly the way they did it. It just, I don't know. It felt like they kept saying something without actually saying something because it was just like the same thing over and over again. Daisy Armstrong's missing. Daisy Armstrong is getting ransomed. Daisy Armstrong is not found. Daisy Armstrong is dead. It was just, I think it was too much information too early, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Yeah, and I'll say this because the book, I thought about it a little bit, but like watching this original movie, the only thing I was thinking about was the Lindbergh baby. Like I was familiar with that story, just from like my schooling, education, as it were. And as I was watching, I was like, man, it really feels like that Lindbergh baby thing.
Mhm.
And it made me think more about like I wasn't even thinking about the movie at that point. I was thinking about the book, and it was like in 1934, whenever the book came out, for that story, that must have been so interesting
Yeah.
for all these people who like had this crazy news story about this wild ass like ransom that like they don't have the same resource they don't have television.
Yeah.
So it's newspapers, it's telegrams, and for like Agatha Christie to like take something that was in the zeitgeist like that
Yeah.
and then turn it into a book. I was thinking more about the implications of how interesting this must have been for like an audience reading a book than I was thinking about the movie. So that's a negative.
Yeah, that's not a good thing when you're not thinking about what's happening on the screen. So that's all I got to say about the intro.
Poor
Don't
choice.
Not a good choice. Don't really have much to add. I did want to talk just a little bit about the music. I already mentioned the music in the remake a little bit. It was a really somber, slow score, but it was really emotional piece that plays. Really more towards the end when they're doing the murder and when they're kind of revealing like what's going to happen to them. And then like I think Michelle Pfeiffer is actually the one singing it over the credits.
Wow.
So yeah,
cool.
I think
I gotta rewatch that.
Yeah, so it's a really good score. It's not used a lot, but it's really good, and I guess it was pretty appropriate for the action sequences too. But not really too interested in music during an action sequence. Yeah. But the original film, other than really that that opening with the dun every time, there's not a lot of music in that original film. We are just there with dialogue. A lot of dialogue, and we already talked about how it had a poor flow, so not having music really kind of hurt it.
Yeah, and where there is music, you use the word appropriate. I felt that where there was music, it was inappropriate. There's a murder on the Orient Express, and they're playing like this kind of like upbeat, like the train's leaving the station
Yeah.
music. It's like, doo, 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 doo. And I'm like, no, tonally, no. What are we doing right now,
Yeah,
man?
it's like they were just celebrating the fact that a train was leaving the station with this like weird celebratory music. It
So weird.
was odd. Yeah, I do remember that when the train was leaving. I was like, what is happening?
It just felt so strange. It took me out of it uh, every time it happened because I was like, all right, like you mentioned, you got dum dum, who killed this baby, and then the next thing it's like, train is leaving the station. Yeah, yeah. Although Cassetti is dead, the train is leaving. I'm just like, wait, what? Why? I don't know. Like the remake, to your point, the audio component does what it's supposed to do. Like we mentioned, a good score is actually supposed to disappear.
Mhm.
You know, and it helps you know the gravity of the situation, but you're not supposed to harp on the music. I just felt that visually and tonally, it all worked, and I didn't feel that in the original. I felt that like
Right.
the visuals and the tone weren't working.
Mhm.
I didn't quite understand the music. And then to your point, there's not that much. So then you're left in with a bunch of talking and no like how am I supposed to react to Ingrid Bergman talking about the backwards children? Like is this good? Is this bad? I don't know what to how am I supposed to feel?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that about the music. Also, oh yeah, also just the style. The remake has a lot of stylistic shots, a
Yeah,
lot of interesting shots. I'm just going to talk about a few, just because I thought they were pretty cool. When Poirot first arrives at the actual train, it's a really long oneer shot that kind of follows him outside the train. He sees Mary Debenham, then he goes into the train, and it's still one continuous shot.
sure.
And I thought it was really cool. They have a few shots in the
Yeah.
remake that are just one long shot, just like following somebody on the train. But there's a lot of long, continuous shots, and I just thought that was really cool to do. And there's the one long shot when the murder is discovered that's overhead. You don't even see Cassetti's body. You just see them kind of like just discussing what happened and what they're gonna do. So just a lot of stylized shots in that
Yeah.
remake that I just wanted to throw out there.
I'll say this, Kenneth Branagh, not only does he give us this very eccentric and fun take on Poirot. He's also directing the film, and throughout it, I felt like all of his choices, though bold in a lot of different places, made sense. Like the train was a character,
Mhm.
like the way the vastness of it. It's this big train. You got these night shots with the snow, and it makes sense that it's going to snow because it looks like a snowy place versus the original. Which, look, I understand the limitations and all that, but they made this just big, interesting universe, and like you mentioned, the shots really work. I don't know, the music is in line. I just really enjoyed watching this and the stylistic choices. Was it heavy handed? Sure, the 12 disciples scene, but it was like I got it. It was like, okay, they're doing the Last Supper. Um 12 is an important number in this movie, and to make that connection, which wasn't really in the book, at least not explicitly, it was like, okay, all right, this guy's thinking outside the box. And I think that he really appreciated the source material and he treated it with a lot of respect and care while making choices that I think, these are the natural sins we need to make when we're making the movie. And he leaned into it and said, you know what? Not everyone's going to like this, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to make this my own. And the story felt new and fresh,
Mhm.
in this way that a book from 1930 should not feel like we're breaking new ground. I felt like it felt like that at times, and I appreciated what he was doing.
Mhm.
Really
Uh,
well done.
really well done. I mean, it sounds like we're there, Reggie. Are we
Mm,
there? I think we're there.
we're there.
All right, here we go. Reggie, should the remake of Murder on the Orient Express exist?
The remake of Murder on the Orient Express should exist And here's my rationale. You're taking classic literature and you're saying, I'm going to make the bold choice of changing it. And you know you're going to get the Flame Wars. It's the same thing like if you mess with Star Wars. You can't change the C3PO's like chess piece. Like we're so precious with the source material. And Kenneth Branagh, he made the very bold and smart choice to just change it. I'm just gonna change it, but I'm gonna make it concise so that you understand why I made these changes. I'm gonna make this character black because in 2017 it's gonna be so much easier to just make him black than try to explain all this Italian shit. Like let's not waste time. You know the story. I know the story. Here's my take on it. And if more of our remakes just did that, right or wrong, I think that we would find some common ground. I often find that with your reviews of these that you said, what did the remake do that was different than the original? And this remake shows you what it did different, and it does it often. It does it well, and there's a few hitches that I want to complain about, but I can't because it's its own thing. I'm harping on whether or not a guy did karate at one point. But what I'm not worried about? I'm not worried about the Poirot portrayal. I'm not worried about the Ratchet portrayal. I'm not worried about how they interpreted the story. I knew what the fuck was going to happen, and I was still surprised. Look, man, this was a very, very well done remake. I'm not going to put it in like the pantheon of like masterpieces or anything like that. This is a great remake. They did it all right, and I can't complain. So well done, and it was a good movie.
I'm going to just go ahead and say I wholeheartedly agree with you, Reggie. This is a fantastic remake. I had so much fun watching it. We both read the book, and it's not necessarily an easy one to put on the screen. It does have some pacing issues, that book, because we are interviewing so many people, and then we're interviewing them again. So just to consolidate that in the remake, just to have much better flow. You can't just translate what's in the book to the screen. The original kind of did that. The original has some flow issues. The remake's like, no, we'll just do it in one interview, and Poirot will solve it right there. It's like, okay, yeah, I like that. That's a lot more interesting to me than Poirot dwelling on it for 20 minutes, coming back to it later. Let's just get shit moving. So I think, like you said, it's a bold move on Kenneth Branagh to do that, but it works because it's a movie. I need shit to move. I can't be, like left in suspense like I can in a book. It just won't work. So, just having a much better flow. I like his portrayal of Poirot a lot more than the original. It's so much more charming, a much more warmer portrayal. And I can't wait for his next adventure. We didn't mention this, but the remake ends with a little teaser of Murder on the Nile. I'm on board, dude. Put me there. I want to go on that Nile trip because it's gonna be fun. If it's half as fun as this original, or if it's half as fun as the remake was, then all right, I'm all aboard, man. So it's gonna be really fun to watch that, and it was really fun to watch the remake, and a little unfair because I did watch the remake first. So going from that like well thought out, excellent flow, great portrayals to this original, which is a lot slower, has a lot of issues. I wasn't exactly blown away by too many of the portrayals there. It's serviceable to the source material for sure, but just we modernize it. We make it for a more modern day audience, and that's absolutely what the remake did. It definitely comes into its own, so absolutely should exist.
Not to detract from the original, because here's what I like about the original. What a cast, an ensemble cast. I think that many of them do what they need to do well. But to your point, the book, it's a great book, but you can't do that book in a movie. I mean, I guess they did, and people won Oscars, and that's fine. Like it wasn't a bad movie at all. Like it just there was some moments where it was like, they probably should have just like, mashed it up, because you get an almost equivalent runtime. The original is longer. But I don't know. That remake felt like it just zipped along, even though it was almost 2 hours long. I just really, really enjoyed that he took some risk and he took some big shots. And yeah, if they do Murder on the Nile, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read Murder on the Nile and I'm going to go watch that movie.
Reading it right now, dude.
Nice. Nice. Death on the Nile. Okay, there it is. So I'm gonna read Death on the Nile, not Murder on the Nile. But yeah, at the end of the book, I read it on Kindle. At the end of the book, they had an excerpt from Death on the Nile. I didn't get into because I didn't have time.
Oh.
But now I'm gonna read it because I know this other movie's gonna come out. So that's awesome. And I'm a purist, by the way. I think you've learned that about me from this time. I generally don't like when you mess with stuff, but when you do it with intention and when you do it for real reason and it works, I'm not going to stop. Like, yeah, it's a movie. It's not a book. So thank you. Well done.
Yeah, I'm a purist so much that, like, if it worked in the original source material, why are you changing it?
Sure.
If it's gonna work better, and that's why you're changing it, then I'm okay with it. And I think that he changed things for the better ultimately, not just changing shit because I think I want to see it like this. I don't know if it's gonna make the story any better, but I just think I just want to make this little stupid change. He didn't just do those changes in this remake. He definitely, I don't know, just improved on that original film. It's just so much. It's the flow. I can't emphasize the flow. It is so slow, that original film. It is. It is such a blessing to have this remake with the much better flow.
It is. I mean, even the small things. I mean, the ferry ride at the beginning of the original. Why are we spending so much time with Poirot, like, kind of sick? Why are we spending so much time with Poirot at the restaurant? Why are we spending so much time with Poirot even with Cassetti? It's like, get to, you know what I mean? Like, let's go. And here's the other thing that we're not talking about. I don't like in the original that it's a white kimono. It's supposed to be red. It's a red kimono.
Fair enough. All right, so that's what we thought of the movies. What did you guys think? Did you agree with us? Did you disagree with us? Did you anybody else read the book out there? Which one do you prefer? I mean, I definitely like that remake. It's so good.
I got a feeling that this is going to be a lot like the Manhunter Red Dragon conversation, because we've been getting a lot of comments on those two films. I think we're going to get a lot of comments on this because people like to read, and we're all very precious with the things that we like. So I'm interested to hear other people's opinions about this.
Yeah. All right. So other than that, let's think about what we're going to do next. I kind of picked this one, so if you want to pick the next one.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a suggestion, but I don't know.
No, what do you got? Just while we think about it.
Just changing it up a little bit. Go for something a little lighter, a little bit of Footloose.
Yo. What? Are you serious?
I was thinking Footloose.
Let me tell you something. I know you were trying to get me to suggest one. That is the greatest suggestion I've ever heard. I've got so many opinions about this subject matter that, yes, 1,000 times yes, let's do Footloose.
Footloose. We have the 1984 and the 2011 films. All right. It's time to cut loose, Reggie. Footloose.
I'm talking loose. Footloose. Kick off your Sunday shoes. Jeez. Louise.
All right.
Whoa, Milo. Okay, that's enough. So I guess we're watching Footloose.
Change it up, man.
All right, cool. This is quite the departure. You are 2 for 2 in recent memory. All right, yeah, I like it, man. Let's watch Footloose.
Cool. All right, great. Well, thanks to everybody for listening, watching. You know, if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely leave us a comment. We love talking with you guys. If you're listening to this on iTunes, if you can give us a 5-star review or leave us a nice comment, we'd appreciate that. We're also on Spotify, Google Play, and we're also on the social medias everywhere at Retro vs. Remake, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Check those out if you haven't already.
I'm Reggie Parker at RP Comedy. Let me tell you something. I think we're really starting to get this format down. Like this movie, I got the wind in my sails, and we're going right into Footloose. It's probably an allegory of sorts, I imagine. So thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. It's keeping us going. You know, like when I see the comment, we're having like real discussions about good films. It makes it all worth it.
All right. Well, I'm Dan Bulick.
I'm Reggie Parker.
And this has been another episode of Retro versus Remake.